to please remember that even though it may be your social group, it's not necessarily a good group to be running around with and demonstrating to the public what they think is a lack of proper distancing. We cannot assume that you're all family members when you're all the same age. So please, I'm asking you to show some restraint and respect for the crisis, because it is inevitable that people in this community are going to get sick, and many of them are doing their best and doing their part to ensure that they don't infect others, and we ask you to do your best to ensure that no others are in fact infected. So please do your part to keep our city services running. Practice safe waste and recycling disposal. Clean all recycling containers. The following should be securely bagged and thrown in the garbage: cleaning cloths and disposable wipes, even those listed as flushable and compostable, used Kleenex, personal hygiene products, face masks and gloves, and any other similar items. Please do not flush wipes down the toilet. I want to thank everyone in the community who is doing their part.
Participant in the conference.
On one level, we have seen an amazing outpouring of community spirit. Hearts and windows, nightly cheers of support for healthcare workers. It is really incredibly touching, actually, to see how people have reacted and stepped up. With the exception of a few who may remember the Second World War in our community, we have never faced a common crisis like this. We have had our economic ups and downs, but to face a health crisis that has so limited and changed the way we behave, the way we interact in our community is quite remarkable. And I want to thank everyone in the community who continues to do their part. I want to thank those businesses who are working hard to implement physical distancing protocols. And I'd like you to go out and, where possible, I don't mean go out unnecessarily, go out online, go out by way of telephone, support those businesses. This is an economic crisis for those who are in small business and providing services in our community, and we need to support them wherever and however we can within the safe distancing guidelines and the guidelines that should govern our whole approach to life. And call on those businesses who have not implemented the protocols to do their part when you see them not doing their part. This is a time to be gently instructive, the way we should be with our children, and I don't wish to sound patronizing, but to be gently instructive when you see people engaging in behaviors, whether they be in business or out in the community, wherever you are, that endanger public's health and safety and breach the guidelines and directions and orders. Say something kind, but be instructive. The more of us who follow direction from health professionals, the quicker we can flatten this curve, and the faster we can get back to what most of us will realize now was a pretty remarkable and wonderful life, and that we thought was maybe a little normal and boring. I appreciate this is a very stressful time for everybody, but please remember to be kind to one another. I have said it many times before, I've always believed and observed that we are at our best when we are doing for others. And sometimes doing for others is not actually doing something. Not today, on April the 1st in 2020. Doing something for others is not engaging unnecessarily out in the community when you don't have to. I want to offer a special thanks, obviously, to the healthcare workers in our community, whatever role they're playing, and also to recognize the childcare providers in the community who are ensuring that healthcare workers and those delivering necessary services, those who are ensuring that the grocery supply chain and the supply of necessary services continues, those people providing childcare so that they can continue to do their work, they too deserve recognition. So as we move forward, and we will move forward, take pride in the fact that those of you who are doing the right thing are indeed doing the right thing. As I've said before, I'd like to think that someday when we tell these stories to our children and grandchildren, depending on our age, that we'll be able to say that we did what was the right thing at a tough time and an unprecedented time in the lives of all of us, with very few exceptions. So thank you very much. Forgive the wordiness. Ms. Gurry.
So I would suggest maybe we take a 10-minute recess and see if we can get that up and running, because there is much public interest. I won't ask you to repeat everything you just said, because that will be recorded, but Mr. Rudolph has suggested that possibly we take a 10-minute recess to see if we can get.
I think that sounds wonderful. I just hope my verbiage didn't crash the website. I'm going to recess this meeting for 10 minutes.
Thank you.
The wonders of IT. Great work.
agenda, which consists of reports. I would call up Mr. Rudolph, please. It's the COVID-19 response operations updates. And we have a number of people to advise us, and I hope that those of you who are listening at home will take advantage of this to perhaps learn things about your city you didn't know before, and what occurs behind the scenes, and how much work has been done to keep this city operating, Mr. Rudolph, and my compliments to you and senior staff and everyone working with you.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to share with you and the community the work that is going on in the city and all of our service area responsibilities, and to provide you with that update. And so just a couple of comments before each of the service area managers and directors and general managers speak to you, and there'll be brief updates and an opportunity for questions, of course. As you recall, this, from a staffing perspective, earlier on in March, it became an all hands on deck and virtually all hours of the working day effort from all members of our senior management team and senior group to address what became quite a large amount of volume of information and change and so forth. So back on March 11th, of course, we started with these meetings, and then on the 12th of March, the EOC got activated. The province declared a provincial state of a health emergency and an emergency, and then we activated on a level 2 EOC later on in the month, and we've been full bore in terms of maintaining our staff levels to the best we can. So, of course, like everywhere else, the doors were closing. Our staff were our first priority in terms of protecting them and making them feel comfortable. So they were self-determining their availability and all sorts of things over the first number of days, or now even weeks. And we've created quite a proactive, sophisticated way to have people calling in, to have the virtual workforce and all that type of thing. So that's available to inside workers. That is not available to outside workers. And I must say, to a person, it's been a remarkable show of strength and resilience of our entire workforce to be there. And I've been really surprised at how many people are really there. And they realize they're not only there for themselves and for their job, but for the community. So it's been quite a process for us. So I just had a few things I wanted to say, and then everybody else will say what's been going on. So one of the things that our senior management team has been thinking through are what are overarching principles to address any of these major issues. What are the principles? And I'll read out a couple of those just so you're aware. The first one on the list was community and staff safety and well-being is the top priority. Community and staff safety and well-being is the top priority. We've been religiously, if I can use that term, adhering to the directives of Dr. Bonnie Henry and other government orders and guidelines. Those are what our paramount directives coming from in terms of this provincial and national emergency. We've been taking a measured approach and consider the longer-term implications of each of these decisions that we're making. We've had the mantra since day one of maintain service levels where we can. Identify and give priority to essential services within each of the service delivery departments, and each of the managers will speak to that today. Exercise fiscal prudence at this time. A number of bullets under this just to share with you. From a management perspective, this is where we're sitting. Non-essential expenditures are suspended, including non-essential training and travel. Staffing vacancies shall only be filled on a case-by-case basis for essential services only, and services that are subject to the approval of the CAO. Full implementation of the 2020 business plans and capital works program is suspended until such time as the health emergency is over and council policy directives have been established for the 2020 budget. Projects tenders, and other obligations in play may continue subject to contractual obligations, reestablishment of priorities due to council policy and financial directives. Over the past several weeks, the organization has been significantly impacted. As I mentioned earlier, our workforce has been tremendous in adjusting to new work procedures and working from home, in the office, and in the community with physical distancing and other safety precautions. Just wanted to give you some of those remarks before each of the members of our senior leadership team speak to you, and each of them have been asked to be brief, knowing that there's a long list of them and that there might be some questions, and so I'll turn it over to the first speaker, the superintendent of the RCMP.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rudolph. Superintendent Miller, welcome.
Afternoon, Your Worship. I'm just going to go over, as Mr. Rudolph said, very quickly, just some of the stuff the Nanaimo RCMP is doing at this time. So first off, we are maintaining police operations 24/7. In spite of that, our front counter is closed, so we're not allowing the public in, but we are going and responding to calls. Our file count is slightly dropping at nighttime, but in the day the file count's being boosted. Just a couple of quick statistics for you. Our shoplifting cases have dropped by about 80%, that being that most businesses are closed, and the grocery stores and other places that are open have security guards in there not conducive to shoplifting. Consuming liquor and intoxication in public is up by about 45%. This is the last 2 weeks of March versus the first 2 weeks of March. Break-in enters to businesses up 65%. Break-in enters to residentials are up 20%. So we are seeing some of that sort of stuff. For all of our members, PPE is in place, personal protective equipment. So they've got all the equipment they're going to need, N95 masks and shields and whatnot. We've developed new policies regarding our cells, how we clean the cells when we bring prisoners in if they're suspected to have COVID-19 or other infectious diseases. We've also amended our policy when we attend sudden deaths. If it's a suspected COVID-19 death, we will equip our members with what we call disposable suits, bunny suits, and masks so they reduce the risk of exposure. Cleaning staff has been increased, and we've borrowed some of the cleaning staff from other agencies. So the Parks and Rec have closed. They're helping to keep our building clean. Where possible, some of our staff is working from home, such as our analysts that can do stuff remotely. Today I put out a public service message to the community, which will be posted on the city's website, encouraging people to stay safe. One thing I wish to draw to council's attention, our training has been suspended until at least September 15th. All leave in the RCMP has been canceled until July 1st by the Commissioner of the RCMP. Homeless people on the street, we've noticed, are becoming more aggressive. They're somewhat confused because this is a situation they haven't seen before with respect to the restaurants where they get their food, and a lot of their services are being closed. We're noticing the street price of drugs has increased because the supply coming in from the States is shut down with the border being closed. And that sort of keeping it very short and sweet is where we're at now with Nanaimo RCMP. Any questions, Your Worship or Council, I'll be pleased to answer.
Any questions? Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Superintendent Miller. Can you tell me the greatest challenge you're facing right now?
To answer the question, Your Worship, the greatest challenge I have right now is ensuring that I will have enough officers to meet the need. At this time, I am fully staffed and I can meet all operational requirements. In the event my officer are exposed to COVID-19, I could realistically lose a whole watch, and that would require me to move resources and to redeploy and reapply resources in different areas. So my biggest challenge right now is making sure that my officers stay safe and have the support they need to help the community.
Councillor Armstrong.
Is it correct? Oh, sorry, I guess I have to use the mic. Is it correct, Superintendent Miller, that you've already moved your plainclothes units down to operational on the road?
So to Councillor Armstrong, to the Chair, what I have done at this time is I've redeployed a number of resources to bolster my front lines. For example, the Minister of Education has closed schools and for the rest of the year. My school liaison team doesn't need to be working in schools right now. That, with a number of other sections, have been collapsed and placed into front lines to allow a greater and more timely response to frontline calls, especially during the day when we're having a lot of people call in saying, they're seeing strange people, seeing strange things, and we're responding. So those units are collapsed into frontline duties. They'll be stood up again when this is over, and we will get through this, but at this time they are collapsed.
Anyone else? Superintendent Miller, I take it from the numbers, what you're really saying is that the easy access to theft, presumably to support drug habits, is now shifted to breaking and entering.
That is what we're seeing, Your Worship. Basically, I've encouraged in my public service message this morning, people lock their doors to vehicles. We still see people going around at night trying door handles of cars, trying to get into them, and easy thefts. What we call CEPED, crime prevention through environmental design. Take care of your stuff, take care of your property. Anything that can be stolen by street people who are now in a state of almost desperation will be taken. One of the issues is, though, there's not much of a place to fence it these days because nobody's buying stolen goods because the whole community is basically locked down.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you today.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Next, we're going to hear from the Nanaimo Fire Rescue Department. Fire Chief Fry, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. So just following up on Superintendent Miller and some of the precautions and actions that we've been taking with Nanaimo Fire Rescue, and a little bit to let you know some of the work that we've been doing. So first and foremost, we opened up our business continuity plans, and we enacted a department operations center to help manage the day-to-day staffing and operations of a fire department. As we well know, the situation is changing daily, and the responses and protocols are changing daily for us. As Mr. Rudolph indicated, our priority is to reduce the risk and protect our first responders, first and foremost, and then to protect our community and save lives and property. So last night we saw an order come through from the medical health officer. So my original update to you has now been changed again. Effective today, our reduction in medical responses through a provincial order will be lowering them to the most critical and what they indicate as purple calls. So those that really have imminent threat to life. With that, we will probably see an immediate reduction of about 94% less medical responses over in the coming weeks as this progresses. We are still responding to all of the calls for service, for fires, for alarms, for investigations, for burning complaints. We've restricted burning. Outdoor burning is not permitted on Protection Island or in the city of Nanaimo on properties over 1 acre. Generally in April we allow burning. We've rescinded that simply for the fact of trying to protect as many of our vulnerable populations as we can, and those that would be more apt to getting COVID-19. Again, we're adhering to all of the provincial health recommendations, and we get regular updates on protective personal equipment, and we're making sure that our supplies are intact for that. Again, our front counter is also closed, but we do have a switchboard that is being answered 24/7, and we too are open for business 24/7. We are installing smoke alarms. We will continue to do that. For us, that is an essential and critical service to our community. We need to protect our community not only from COVID-19, but from all other hazards that represent or may be presented to them. We have limited our training to only essential training, and we have moved to an online model for some of our staff and for some of our clients through our training academy. We have stopped doing our routine regular fire inspections that are not mandatory at this point in time. The responsibility is to the business owners, but we have updated information on the city's website and the fire department website for businesses that are still operating so that they will know what they can do to make sure that they're compliant with the BC Fire Code. Apart from that, just wanted to kind of thank the community. We've had a lot of support from the community for the first responders. But I will ask, in general, there's a lot of generosity out there, and for example, people would like to give gifts to the fire service. I'm not going to speak for any of the other essential services, give gifts or discounts to the fire service. But our position is that we would rather you see that give it to some of our charities that are really hurting right now in our community, and would encourage people, instead of offering it to the fire service. We are working and we are conducting our regular business, but there are a lot of underserved people in our communities that would do better with that. And that's about all I have.
Thank you, Chief Fry. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chief. We heard from some firemen, I guess about 3 days ago, that you were running low on PPE. Is that now correct, or were you able to secure some?
Through your worship to Councillor Armstrong. So we have done some counts, and the Centre for Disease Control amends what is the minimum requirement. So I can tell you right now, we have at the minimum well over 2 months supply for all of our supplies, and we will see that continue to change as our responses will be minimized as well. And we're taking every precaution when we go to any medical call in order to protect our first responders and protect the community too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Fry. Next, we're going to hear from Public Works. Mr. Sims. I see Mr. Harding was racing you for the podium.
Mr. Harding, thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Harding and I often have this debate about who's more essential, he or I. Glad to see you putting him second today. Public Works is often referred to as the fourth first responder, so we're always there for the community. Our groups are very much focused on keeping calm, taking a good stock of the situation, carefully planning and preparing for whatever eventualities. So our overarching goals mirror those that Mr. Rudolph mentioned, but also the emergency management system in BC. So keep critical services running, protect the health of our responding staff, and protect our critical infrastructure. And those we define as drinking water. So drinking water is safe in this community. We have our staff prepared to do whatever it takes to keep the drinking water continuing to flow. That's a critical health service in itself. Our sanitary sewer, where everyone flushes their toilet, you do not want that backed up. And Your Worship, you mentioned at the outset, and I want to echo that, these disinfecting wipes are simply not flushable and end up clogging up our sewers, creating a distraction for our critical resources and impacts the sewage treatment plant that the regional district runs. Sanitation is the next one, so garbage pickup. We, as Your Worship knows, this is one of our most sensitive subjects in the city. We're seeing a great number of people expressing more appreciation for realizing that how critical this service is. I spoke to our operators this morning. I thanked them on behalf of the citizens and said that this was one of the most important services that's being offered today in the city. Transportation is another one. We need to keep the roads open and safe. Storm drainage to make sure that there's no flooding. And our fleet services that support not only fire rescue, but all of the city vehicles and equipment. We have dispatch operating 24 hours a day at the Public Works Yard. That's a live voice, a calm voice, and can answer technical questions often right away and help keep public calm. And then I have to acknowledge as Mr. Rudolph calls it, the back office support that we receive from other divisions, the payroll, certainly, finance, human resources, and occupational health and safety, and of course, information technology overarching a lot of this stuff. So Public Works very early on implemented a number of measures, even before they became orders. So social distancing, working from home where possible. Even at the Public Works Yard, there are a few that can work from home. We've adjusted shift start times to avoid contact. We've changed people's muster areas so they're not all mustering in the same location. Some are mustering from home. We've put in a protocol of disinfecting every vehicle every day. We're keeping our fuel storage stocked up. We've canceled any meetings that are not essential. We've gone now to a single occupant per vehicle, just to keep that social distancing. We've also restricted access to our public facilities, our public works facilities as well. And we've upped our game with personal protective equipment. Refreshed our business continuity plan, so we're making sure that our business is continuing to function. We've activated the Public Works Departmental Operations Center, which is sort of a subset of the Emergency Operations Center. This allows a coordinated response, and it allows us to flag issues early. We're working with the regional district to prepare a mutual aid agreement to exchange critical operations staff, such as sewer or water operators. And of course, we're communicating as best we can. We've worked with the occupational health and safety for safe work procedures to, for third parties to come onto our sites and participating in the Emergency Operations Center. While I'm here, I just thought I'd also touch on engineering. The engineering folks are concerned with maintaining and upgrading the projects that are our core assets, our utilities. So they're operating in a business continuity mode. It's very sustainable at this point. Those who are able to work from home are working from home. A number of the field staff are mustering and only coming into the office when necessary. We're focused on the critical projects, the important projects, and the strategic. We've kind of separated out. We've put pause on some of the procurement for capital projects, as Mr. Rudolph mentioned, until we can assess and make sure that we can build out and we can continue this appropriately. So as has been said a couple of times already, the situation is very disruptive. The entirety of our department, I'd probably guess that the entirety of city staff is focused on responding, as the euphemism of keeping the lights on, keeping the city running. The opportunity for new strategic priorities or projects is somewhat limited at this point in time. I'd be happy to take any questions on any of that information.
Councillor Hemmons.
I don't know which one I am over here, but I'm going to ask you the same question. What's the greatest challenge you're facing right now?
The biggest challenge?
Yeah.
So I stopped at that. So some of the anticipated issues is just monitoring the stress and anxiety level of our staff. They're out there all the time, and there's a lot of uncertainty. I think that goes across the board for any worker that's in the public on a frequent basis. We're trying to keep it calm. We're trying to implement those protocols that keep them safe, but also to recognize that to be under stress and to have that anxiety it's okay. And we'll try and give the tools to and the space and the time for those people to process it. So that's a biggie. And the usual protocols of chapped hands and sneezing and all that sort of stuff. But
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to all your staff. I know I'm hearing lots of great stuff as well. And just for further reference, on Monday when you come back to us, will you be having a list of the projects that you've looked at and be giving us those that which you think are critical and those which can, like from your perspective, priority down the line?
thank you. Your Worship, there's an information report coming at the next council meeting, which is Monday evening, that we hope to have that discussion with you, yes.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bonner.
Sure, how do you want to do this?
I'll step away from the podium. Wait, where do I go?
Thank you. And I want to thank you very much for making sure all the water is going and garbage and everything else is collected. A couple of questions that came from me from members of the public. One is a couple of days ago, the province canceled parking fees in hospitals due to the issue that people had to touch kiosks to pay for the parking. Is that something we're looking at doing here in town? Because we also have kiosks where people have to touch them to pay for parking. The other question came just recently out regarding garbage collection. And the issues is for some reason, we now have more people walking on our sidewalks, which is a good thing. But there's concern about having to walk where the garbage cans have been placed, and some of them haven't been placed maybe the best place for walking, and blocking sidewalks, and the garbage cans have been touched by people that aren't the people walking beside them. Have you had any thoughts to how about that and what sort of consequences those might be? Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Bonner's questions are both good. I think the first one on parking will be a strategic discussion that council can have in the near future. I think it's certainly a valid question. The second one regarding placement of bins. Typically, our drivers will place the bins back where they find them, but I think this is a good point that we can use our tool, our app for garbage collection to send back out just a message, hey, folks, please keep your cans off the sidewalk. I think it's a good suggestion, and I can implement that quickly.
No further questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Sims. Much appreciated. Sorry, Mr. Councillor Turley.
Thank you. Mr. Sims, I know I'm probably one of the anal ones given my wife's health situation, but I always carry these wipes with me, and no matter what I touch it with a wipe first. And I think maybe one of the suggestions that could go out to the community is that carry some of these wipes with you, and you have to touch something that you're not sure who's touched previously to you. Touch it with one of the wipes, and then you're okay.
I think,
Did you hear me?
it was a comment. In fairness, Mr. Sims, I think it was more of a comment than a question. Councillor Turley suggesting that he carries wipes with him wherever he goes so that he doesn't have to touch any surface without cleaning it first. So I think that's probably what he was getting at in terms of people's actions with respect to city property or kiosks.
I think, Your Worship, the main...
Add it to the message. Carry wipes.
The main point that I think we'd all want to make is to dispose of them appropriately when you're finished, not to flush them in a toilet or leave them lying around.
And keep washing those chapped hands. Thank you. Mr. Harding, Parks, Recreation and Culture.
Thank you, Your Worship. Your introduction actually provided a lot of the quick summary that I was going to provide, plus Mr. Sims provided a lot of detail on how staff are being deployed and operational issues as we deal with this. But just quickly, as you mentioned, all our facilities now have been closed since March 16th. Staff on our major facilities are working on our what we usually do, our yearly shutdowns in September or the summertime, so they're working away on those opportunities. All rentals, events, programs have now been canceled to May 1st, and refunds, if people haven't received them yet, I'm sure they will soon on all the programs. And as the event continues, we'll continue to move events and rentals and move those out for cancellations. As the Worship mentioned, the recreation coordinators have been putting on, I thought, very innovative and different ideas for people at home and with families for isolation recreation programs. And if people want to look at some of those, look at our Facebook page or city page, or if you're on Instagram, and they've done some creative aspects there. Although all our facilities are closed, there's a couple of essential services we are trying to provide. For example, this week, the blood donor clinic is ongoing right now at Bevan Social Center. So for those who are able to give blood, that event's open from March 31st to April 2nd. So and then we're also trying to work with some of our childcare providers of opening up some of the facilities for essential workers so that childcare can happen. Other than that, main aspects is our parks and recreation, our park services. Of course, our parks won't wait for this event to end, so the growing season has started. So the public will be seeing maintenance of our fields and our parks and our trails as we go into the growing season. With that said, though, we do have a number of things that are closed. All playgrounds are closed. All sports courts, lacrosse, hockey, pickleball, volleyball, basketball, and tennis courts are closed. If not locked, then they're signed. We do, of course, have some issues with some who just climb the fences, so we have to take some extra measures to stop that. So public will be seeing some interesting measures to stop skateboarding in some of our parks and our bike parks, different aspects with that. And as Worship, you mentioned, so our major parks and trails are still open, and we are installing some more signage to educate people or remind people about social distancing, and that even though the parks are open, it's really about recreating with your family or those in your household. And so, as you mentioned, there's a couple areas that we're having some issues with that, and we may need to proceed to close some of those. But again, open any questions that council may have on parks, recreation, and culture.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you. Sorry, can you go back to the childcare piece and walk me through that? We're looking for spaces for workers who have childcare needs?
No, we have a couple of providers. The Boys and Girls Club, for example, are trying to look to reopen either at Chase River, which is our facility, Chase River Activity Center, or Bevan House. And we also have a provider that does after-school care at 2 locations, one at Bevan Park, one at Bowen. I know the Bevan Park one is opening up 2 days a week right now, from 1 to 5 to help that services. And I know Boys and Girls Club are still working on how they're going to, if they are open or be able to open to provide care for the essential service people.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. And I believe that when you're doing this, you're following all the guidelines, right, under what the province has set us out.
Thank you, Councilor Armstrong. Yes, so as Mr. Rudolph mentioned, we're following everything that the health has provided us. Where we get some questions, we are then asking the local health authority to clarify some issues for us, and then we'll adopt or adjust as the event continues and as information evolves. So we're constantly trying to change as we go along.
And if I may, Mr. Harding, am I incorrect in assuming that we're seeing a significant increase in park usage in the city of those parks that are in fact open and available?
Your Worship, we don't have full numbers, but they're definitely, with the weather being good and families home, it does provide an opportunity for people to get out and exercise if they do it as we're directed to by health and social distancing and appropriately. They're great ways to get out and recreate and do things. We have a lot of course, I'm going to say this, but we have a lot of great parks and trails where people can get out and enjoy it. But again, as per direction from health.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Harding, I'm just curious, Mr. Harding, in terms of parks maintenance and prep, are you proceeding on the assumption that at some point spring and summer recreational activities such as organized softball, fastball, and so on might be able to resume, and you're getting fields ready just in case?
So, Your Worship, to Councillor Thorpe, so with the maintenance of those areas, we can't let the asset go. So we're maintaining the sports fields particularly. So if we just let go, it'll be very difficult to bring back.
Right.
So that's where they'll continue. Not so much for the activities to start, although that would be great. If things do change, we will be ready. Same with our facilities. We're trying to get everything ready so when the situation does change, our recreation facilities, our pools and arenas can open at the appropriate time. However, with our parks, again, we'll have the medians and the boulevards and those park areas that we don't want to just let go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. The next is Development Services. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, Council. Thanks for the opportunity for this brief update. And I just want to start with reiterating something that I heard you say, Your Worship, is that we may be closed to the public, our buildings, but we're open for business. And I think that's a good summary of what I want to convey to yourselves and to the community today. The SARC building, where the entirety of the Development Services Department can be found, the building has been closed to the public, but staff are there and the work of our department continues. We've moved in this environment to have all of our applications and our meetings move into an online platform. And I want to, I guess I want to confirm with Council that we haven't had to change overnight. We're actually started at a very good place where we've been moving this way for a number of years, and we have a number of our functions which are digital or online. For example, our engineering reviews are done completely with digital submissions, digital referrals, returning back to applicants. We have the building department was one of the first in the province to actually go to full digital plan checking on our permits for single-family homes. So that's those steps that we took many years ago have helped us to move quickly to this new reality that we find ourselves in. There were some parts that we always wanted to get to, and I would say the last couple of weeks has forced us to probably deal with those quicker than we ever expected. I really want to take a moment to thank the staff and the support we've received from our IT department in actually allowing some of these things to happen. There's some really simple things around, you would think about how we get documents signed when we can't go face-to-face with customers, and we've had solutions brought forward about that and implemented, and it's really allowed for us to move forward quickly with this online platform. And I was talking to staff as recently as yesterday, talking about how things are working, and they were citing some great examples where normally if we had a developer come to town, they would come with their team of people, and we would all crowd in a room with our staff, and we would spend a few hours going over their proposal and their plans. We're still doing that. We're just doing it now using various tools to have virtual meetings. So we have meetings with developers yesterday from Vancouver where we could pull their plans up on the screen. Our staff are there. Some participating out of office, but they're there and able to participate in the meeting, and their staff and their consultants are also there, and we're able to carry on with the business. So we're finding that to be working quite well. We have, and I think I've certainly heard Mr. Sims speak to measures we're taking to support social distancing at work. We have a number of individuals, for those individuals in our department that can work remotely, we've moved forward and have a number of people working remotely and reduced the number of people that you may find in SARC at any one time. Now again, people remain available. If people have calls, if they have questions of us regarding developments, if they want to talk to us, people are there. We remain available to have those conversations at any time. Your Worship, I get some questions to us about, well, what are we seeing out in the field? What's happening in the real world? We're continuing to provide all our services. Our planning, engineering, subdivision, our building inspection services are continuing. The comments I'm getting back from my inspectors in the field is that they're certainly seeing most of the smaller projects all proceed as normal, single-family construction. On some of the larger projects, the employers themselves have taken some measures to deal with social distancing, so we'll often go to sites and find just less people working on a site than what we typically expect, where maybe contractors are being phased in and out. We're only aware of one large project that's actually stopped at this time, but the rest of the projects in the city seem to be continuing. Of course, today being April 1st, I'm able to give you the first quarter stats and what we've seen so far this year. And I can confirm that we've issued permits for 42 single-family dwellings for a total of 99 new units in the community. Our construction value as of today sits at $35 million. I did get a note from staff that we have a number of building permits which are just about to go out the door, which have a value of about $28 million. So we're expecting us to be up over the $50 million mark fairly quickly. One of the measures we always look at is get a sense of what's coming as development permits, and planning staff have confirmed for me today that we had 14 development permits applications in the first quarter of this year, which is up significantly from 5 that we had in 2019. So a number of big applications are continuing to come in, and still the interest in Nanaimo is high. And one of those is actually another 149-unit seniors housing facility. Your Worship, of course, this is all within the context of we're 2 weeks into this new normal, and we'll be very interested to continue to monitor this and give you regular updates as we move through. But the message I really want to leave is that we remain open for business, and that staff are there and prepared to answer questions and respond to the public as needed.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown. The old podium switch.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Lindsay, I'm just curious if, and maybe we're not quite there yet, but on items such as rezonings where there's public hearings or development permits, development variance permits where folks might want to come and speak before council, how do we foresee handling that public input while respecting sort of a safe and responsible forum?
It's a good question, Your Worship, and I think there's been some guidance from the province, and I think Ms. Gurry can speak to some of that when she comes up later, talking about what we expect to see in meetings. One of the things that we are kind of expecting to see from the province, but we have not yet seen, is around public hearings. And as we bring forward applications, we are going to be giving council some options around that. There is no requirement on the zoning bylaw amendment that council has to hold public hearings. So we may be bringing forward the option to, at this time, not to have public hearings and have some alternate form to allow for the community to provide input that council may consider. But we're at early stages looking at options, and I would expect the next time we have an application in front of you, we'll have some options in those reports.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay, much appreciated. The next is bylaws. Mr. LeBerge.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, Council. I'll begin just giving you a quick overview of the ministerial order that was enacted by the provincial government on March 26 as it pertains to bylaw enforcement, enforcing the public health orders. In short, what it says is that local governments must ensure that their bylaw enforcement resources are available to provide assistance as required for the purpose of enabling, or rather for enforcing public health orders. And I just want to emphasize it's assistance as required by the public health officer. That kind of assistance includes monitoring facilities and areas that are closed to the public by a public health order, in providing warnings and information and advice to businesses and members of the public with respect to health orders, and providing health officers with information with respect to serious potential contraventions of health orders. What it does not authorize bylaw officers to do is to detain persons. They cannot issue fines, penalties, or impose any administrative penalties under the Public Health Act. So in short, although we have the order and the requirement to provide enforcement services, really we're just another set of eyes that report back to the health officer that can take those enforcement actions as they see fit. So in furtherance to that, we've sought out some input from the area health officer on what that assistance as required looks like, and what they've reported back to us. And I have to qualify this that the context changes every day, and we're expecting an update possibly today from the Chief Health Officer. But they're telling us that their current focus is on the delivery of health care, and at this time our local health authority does not have an enforcement policy, although they're developing one, and they're not asking local government bylaw services to provide support with enforcement at the moment. We have had some clarity from the area health officer, and I think it was raised earlier by Your Worship on matters such as what these health orders on mass gatherings and what the implication would be to areas, outdoor spaces like trails, stairs, or seawalls. And they're of the opinion that it would be more problematic to try to curtail or prevent the public from using these spaces, but just to try to self-govern and proper protocols of social distancing as circumstances warrant. So the messaging is that outdoor movement isn't being limited at this time, but could always be reevaluated at another time. So that being said, the priorities of the bylaw services this time is to be prepared to enforce health orders if requested. And we're focusing our duties on, in an order of priority, of course, first being health and public safety and matters of city liability. And in the current health emergency, this is really where all of our resources are going 7 days a week. We're also accepting any calls for service involving nuisances or nominal infractions, such as unsightly conditions, but it's just a matter of when we can get to those calls, and that could be a matter of weeks before some of those things could possibly be addressed. Our officers right now are closely working with the police, and we're really emphasizing the protection of our public property and city infrastructure. A lot of downtown is closed for business, and we have a lot of infrastructure, and we just want to reassure the public that we have officers out 7 days a week watching the properties while they're closed for business. So in addition to providing a highly visible presence downtown, we're also in all the city parks and monitoring the areas and facilities that have been closed by our Parks Department. We continue to enforce any of the bylaws which maintain peace and good order, but we're exercising discretion in matters such as parking enforcement in recognition that residents may be in self-quarantine. Wherever possible, we're minimizing our attendance to properties in person to minimize in-person contact, to avoid contributing to anxiety unless it's in an emergency situation, and following recommendations or requirements to limit in-person contacts. Our communications are, in this respect, are largely by phone, letter, or email when appropriate. We're also deferring our remediation actions unless it's a matter of health and safety, in recognition that a lot of these actions have potential economic hardships and may involve other personal circumstances. My clerical administrative staff are all working from home now and receiving calls from the public from their homes, and all the bylaw officers are out deployed in the field, all working in separate vehicles and have been assigned appropriate personal protection equipment as required. And whenever possible, they're coordinating all their security duties with the police. And I know the Downtown Bike Patrol have now deployed 7 days a week, so we're working very closely with them to ensure the safety of our bylaw officers. We're not entering any private residences or entering on our properties unless in exigent circumstances. I know Superintendent Miller spoke a bit about the context out in the street, and I just want to reiterate some of the comments that the superintendent made, that our officers are certainly seeing that there's a heightened tension and anxiety on the street. The thing that the officers are seeing is that there's a sense of fear and that there's clearly a scarcity of services. One of the things that's arisen is that there's more cases of hoarding food on the street, just like some people do in their homes, and it's making it more difficult to keep some of these encampments that we encounter every day mobile. There are many more folks in the community that live on the street that are attempting to shelter in our city parkades and around our facilities. And our officers are kept quite busy just going to the different city amenities that have been closed, such as skate parks and lacrosse boxes and the taped-off playgrounds, where we're finding a lot of folks are continuing to gather. Some of the tertiary impacts, of course, is that without the enforcement and people sheltering as they are, is that our on-street parking and parkade revenues are practically down to nil now, and a lot of the parking passes have been canceled. And the last thing that we've seen recently also is a significant spike in the graffiti vandalism around the city, unfortunately, just because there's so much kind of unguarded territory out there. So those are the highlights there. I'll stop if there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. LeBerge. Councillor Hemmons?
I'll ask it. Tell me your greatest challenge in your department right now and what you're doing to solve it.
I think I'd probably echo what some of the other directors and managers have mentioned, just keeping a high level of service and responsiveness with the recognition of the anxiety the public's experiencing. And probably the folks that seem to be under the greatest stress are my call takers, and unfortunately they're doing this from home, so they don't get the supports they ordinarily would. But a lot of very frustrated, frightened people calling, and the most common complaints we get are about children are playing out on the street and people aren't respecting social distancing protocols, and what are you going to do about it? And the one thing I've really had to reiterate to my staff and to the public is there's a difference between health advisories or recommendations and health orders. And as critical as social distancing expectations are, they aren't orders, they're just health advisories. And you know, we often tell people we can't legally prevent people from, you know, from kids from playing out on the streets or people walking on the sidewalk and not respecting those protocols. What we can do is deal with mass gatherings of more than 50 people and disperse them. And that may change over time, but I think there's a lot of frustration and resignation when the folks realize that as, you know, the local government and enforcement authority, that we don't really have an exceptional powers to deal with those issues.
Councillor Martman, and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Hey, sorry. Hi, thank you. I'm wondering, through the chair, there has been talk in some, whether it's provincial or whichever, for some of the homeless that are using parking, tenting in the parks or being in the parks, instead of having to move them, the thought of them being able to be in place for 24 hours. And I'm wondering if the type of people that bylaws is coming across, that they're having to move away, if they're the type of people that would be respectful, and that perhaps is something we should be considering, is opening up parks 24 hours in designated places with people that can be respectful and hopefully keep them clean and have a place to be so they don't actually have to move. Thank you.
Your Worship, I'm just going to jump in here because the next item on the agenda is a discussion about this very topic, about vulnerable populations. So I want to, hopefully we can defer questions to that time. I can give a little bit of background, and we'll still have all the resources here so that Council can ask questions of all the staff that are involved in such programs. But if we can defer those questions just for now, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martman. Appreciate it. Councillor Armstrong.
I can't remember. Oh, yeah, I do. What are the stresses on your bylaw officers right now? I know you've talked about your staff, but are there sufficient numbers, or is there a way we can assist with that? With the powers that have been given to us by the province?
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, thank you. I mean, they're under the same stress as every other frontline worker, that they're, you know, out in the public context and interacting with people in difficult, adverse circumstances. They have good protection equipment. They're all driving independently. I could, of course, use more, but we're just doing everything we can with the resources we have available. Thank you.
No further questions. Ms. LaBerge, thank you very much. The next is Corporate Services. Ms. Legan.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Corporate Services provides necessary behind-the-scenes work, and I'm going to talk about 4 areas. One is emergency operations. As Mr. Rudolph said, we have activated the Emergency Coordination Center, and I just want to talk a minute to let you know what that's all about. The primary role initially was to assess our operation of essential services and make sure we had the staffing to continue with our essential services. We do daily reviews of provincial orders, and we clarify details so that the city has an appropriate response. So a fair bit of digging and looking and analyzing for the details so we can execute on the orders. We prioritize advanced planning, so making sure that we're looking ahead, and at some point we hope to be looking ahead to our recovery as well, and doing the planning to reopen a lot of our facilities. We do expense tracking for recovery through the Emergency Management BC organization, so it's really critical that we do that appropriately so that the city can recover as much of the expense associated with our response as possible. We've implemented a 3 times a week call with key stakeholders and the regional medical health officer. This was intended to lower the workload for the regional medical health officer, but get the same key messages to our other stakeholders in this region at the same time, and that's at 8:45 every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We invited SFN, Sinixic First Nation, rep to the ECC immediately when we opened it, and we've been in constant contact with their rep ever since. We provide daily provincial reporting, and we are in the process constantly of procuring critical supplies. I'm going to switch now to information technology. In this unique scenario that we're all facing, we have had to deploy work-from-home technology as quickly as possible. We've put out new applications, hardware, we've leased hardware, we've put additional licenses in place, we've purchased and enabled distance collaboration tools for meetings, we've put DocuSign electronic signature in place, and we've set up multiple virtual switchboards so that we're able to actually operate our switchboard from home. From a financial services perspective, we've completed the financial response and recovery framework and a robust financial model to inform decision-making as we progress through this time of having to understand the relief that's coming from different levels of government and how that impacts us and how the city can respond. Of course, we have to keep purchasing running, payroll running, accounting, payables, receivables, and reporting, and we had, in the last couple of weeks, completed and had our 2019 financial statements audited. Lastly, police support services. So there's 67 municipal employees that support detachment, the policing operation in the city. Specifically, we've scheduled casuals where we have staffing shortages. So we haven't taken any measures not to continue, and in fact have stepped up the casual shifts, in particularly for cell block and custodial. And we've employed a concept of shadowing from our particularly front desk at front counter at the detachment, where those employees can shadow non-security cleared employees that are needed in other critical positions that we just don't have the bench strength, or we've got too many off at one point in time. That's it. Thank you. I'm available for questions.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. Prompted by Councillor Armstrong. What's your biggest challenge in your department and how are you facing it?
Yeah, across corporate services, I was anticipating your question. It's uncertainty. So the greatest challenge for us is to make good decisions in the context of a long-term framework. And so that's the most difficult for us, and that's why we put the time in, particularly with finance, to build a very robust model that is capable to have successive variables and multiple scenarios in play so that we can inform any decision making that mayor and council have to make, as well as our operational decision making on a daily basis.
Thank you very much, Ms. Legan. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
The next is Human Resources, Mr. Van Horn.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be exceedingly brief here. So Human Resources, we have enacted the work from home protocols throughout our department quite extensively, with a group meeting every other day pretty much by a video conference to talk about what's going on and what we're hearing from the various operations in the field. From the health and safety standpoint, we've been obviously responding to a lot of new and very different safety concerns. Never used to be a safety concern driving in a vehicle with a person, and now we're having to respond to that and develop protocols. So we've been doing our best to rely on the best medical advice we have available at the time. WorkSafe BC has visited us a couple times to check on what we're doing, and we've held up well under that scrutiny. We've been accelerating our respirator fit testing because we have a number of employees in the field who have various different types of respirators for when they're doing jobs such as repairing sewer mains and so on. So we've been doing that almost constantly for the last 2 weeks. There have been various people in to get their respirators fit tested. On the more HR side of the department, we've been providing extensive support to departments in staffing matters that fall into the collective agreement that the city has with CUPE. It involves when we're trying to come up with workarounds. If we have staff that perhaps there's childcare issues, so we've looked at changing shifts. each time we're doing that, we're going outside of what the collective agreement requires. And so we work with QP reps, we'll call them and say, hey, here's what we've got planned, are you with us on that? And we've got great support on that to date, and doing a whole lot of unusual workarounds that we normally just don't do operationally and wouldn't be doing. So that's been childcare revisions to work schedules, working from home. All of those are differences to our regular everyday operating. So I've been working collaboratively that way. We've also been trying to continue our business as usual to the greatest extent possible, because Human Resources oversees, the ID cards that staff need to get around the building. We've got a hand in payroll input and making sure people are coded to the right cost center, answering questions with respect to benefits administration, labor relations advice, support, and health and safety throughout the organization. And if I were to anticipate a question of what our biggest challenge has been and how we're trying to address it, that would be trying to get a good, consistent answer out to our operations on very unusual questions. The collective agreements that we have with IAFF and CUPE answer a lot of the basic questions. The parties over many years have settled on what the answers to some common problems are. And when we don't agree on those interpretations, we have the grievance process to deal with it. Now we're in a scenario where there's very unusual questions and very unusual work situations that each of our employees are having to deal with, and we're trying to develop good answers for those questions. And we'll do it through video conference, we'll do it through picking up the phone and talking to our union reps and saying, hey, here's what we're thinking, and going through that way. And the biggest challenge we're finding there is trying to get that information in a timely manner, because when the question comes to us, they're looking for a response right now. So that's what we're doing our best. But the video conferencing, and our IT department has done a great job there to enable that to happen. Has just given us the ability to meet virtually, and almost like we're in the room together like this, having the meeting and coming up with our best answer to it, so that we can get that back out to the field to help reduce uncertainty.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. We heard Ms. Lagan talk about how they're doing shadowing at the RCMP, or in other words, even some cross-training. Is that being looked at here? As you know, there's certain jobs, obviously, I look to the rec centers, et cetera, where people won't be able to work. Are we looking at options to cross-train them in different sections as backfill?
Through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, the type of shadowing is, in that particular case, is based on security clearance. So if a person doesn't have a security clearance, they have to have a security cleared person. But in terms of identifying, different aptitudes and skills and abilities to do other things, yes, that is always one of the things that we're looking at.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Horn.
Thank you.
The next is communications. Ms. Gurry. It is April Fool's after all, isn't it? So I guess we should accept the technological problems we've challenging us today.
So thank you, Your Worship and Council. I'm just going to provide an overview of communications, and then I'll follow up with legislative services after that. So what communications has done to date and what they continue to do and will be doing. So in early March, the Communications Department, which is a key member of the Emergency Coordination Center or Emergency Operations Center, was brought in to discuss crisis communication management in relation to COVID-19. As part of the COVID-19 ECC response team, the communications team quickly began to disseminate news releases, statements, video messaging from the mayor to communicate with the city and communicate with the city's public in response to COVID-19. So this included the press conference that was held at City Hall on March 16th, where the Facebook Live video of the press conference had nearly 23,000 views. So you were quite popular, Your Worship. The communications team continues to share news releases, statements, and video messages on our social media channels, as well as the city website. Also, as well as part of the response team, communications quickly began to, besides the news releases, statements, and video messaging, they created and published the COVID-19 informational page and a frequently asked questions, so a Q&A page to assist the public with their COVID-19 health and non-health related inquiries. So these pages are updated on an almost daily basis on our website. On that information page, the public will find COVID-19 information, an overview of what the City of Nanaimo is doing as it relates to COVID-19, including that we are still open for business. There is a link to the city's FAQ page, chronological listing of statements, news releases, and messages from the mayor. The public will find health and non-health related COVID-19 information, and it links to federal, provincial, and local government support for business and workers. We also utilize the alert bar on the city's website, directing the public to 3 key web pages: the city's COVID-19 informational page, the BC government's COVID-19 support page, and the Government of Canada's COVID-19 support page. And that seems to be quite popular because other municipalities picked that up and started using their alert bar as well. So on each page of the City of Nanaimo's website, that alert bar is available for everybody to link to. Some analytics from March 9th to March 30th, 2020. There's been nearly 200,000 visits to our website. 155,000 of those are unique page visits. The top pages they visited are related to COVID-19. So the home page, which was the main landing page, COVID-19 informational page, and the COVID-19 frequently asked questions, which was quite popular, and the public was quite thankful for that page when we developed it. And it's basically Q&As with the factual information from BC's health officer. Our Facebook analytics from March 9th to March 30th. We've reached 160,000 unique users. This means that 160,000 unique users had the city's Facebook posts appear on their screen. Posts include statuses, photos, links, videos, and more. Videos regarding COVID-19, the total Facebook views of these video messages from the mayor is 38,000. For total Twitter impressions, sounds right. There were 155,969 from March 9th to March 30th. So what's coming up next from the Communications Department? So this was written yesterday. However, yesterday, the My Nanaimo This Week e-newsletter continued and was posted last night, and it's a special edition on COVID-19. And again, this electronic newsletter is available on our website for folks that aren't linked into social media. It's an aggregate of all of that information in the one-stop shop so that people that don't engage in Facebook, Instagram, Twitter can go to the website and still get all of that information. And the mayor's end of the week weekly message is coming, as well as we're testing out possible COVID-19 engagement page via our public engagement platform, Get Involved Nanaimo. So we'll be testing some of that. So I'd like to take this time to really thank the communications team. I know a lot of departments are working just to keep the lights on right now during this time, but this team has been working around the clock 7 days a week from the office or from the EOC or home to get this work done. And they're doing this for the public and for the city in order to get the proper information that the public needs in order to feel comforted or know what's going on and where to get the proper information. And they're all doing this, communication staff, legislative service staff, through these unprecedented times, even though they're experiencing the stress of this pandemic themselves, whether they have family members that have some issues and or they themselves have compromised immune systems or illnesses, etc. So I really appreciate them doing this. Positive reinforcement from the public. There has been quite a bit on social media, which is very, very helpful. And I think that helps them to keep going on because they are really working hard. And unlike some people that have the opportunity to work at home, this position kind of requires them to be around the clock and in person taking your videos. So I really want to thank them a lot for all of that. And that's it for communications. So if there's any questions on communications, I can answer those, and then I can go on to legislative services.
Councillor Armstrong.
It's actually more just of a comment. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillors Bonner and Brown for responding to many of the negative comments on Facebook. Their updates were really good. I think people will realize after hearing this that the city is doing its best to put out a lot of information. And I also want to remind people that we're not the lead in this. The lead is the province, and we must follow the orders of the province. If we go out on our own, we're in trouble. So I think it's really important that people understand the city's doing its best to get their communications out, but really the most important communications are coming from the province, and then we're complying with the province. So I want to thank your staff personally, and again to Councillors Brown and Bonner for their updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Before I go to Councillor Bonner, I would say, forgive me for sounding cheeky and a bit whiny, I honestly wish the mayor had and council had the kind of powers that people think we do, particularly in this particular crisis and time of stress, and we don't. But within the context of our authority, I think it's an appropriate time, in light of Ms. Gurry's comments, to say a great thank you to the city staff who continue to deliver all the essential services in this community, and often with a fair degree of criticism and concern from the public that is sometimes quite unwarranted. So compliments and hats off to all of you. Councillor Bonner. It's been a while since you've had to address council from that position.
I was thinking, I said, boy, this feels, like good old times. Yeah, it's a lot calmer now, and the podium's a lot nicer too. Thank you for that. And thank you, Your Worship, through you to the staff, if I may. My question is regarding communications, and there has been some complaints. So in trying to deal with some of the complaints, I looked at other cities and what they're doing, and many of them have in their news releases, daily news releases on various issues, but they're consistent, and every single day they've had a news release. We're not doing that. Our news releases on COVID, the last one was March 25th, I think, or about 8 days ago. And then the one after that was regarding the Port Theatre. Can you explain why we're not going with the news release and we're going with other options? Thank you.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Bonner. I can answer that partly. We have come up with several news releases that haven't ended up going out, partially because we're waiting for follow-up or complete information. Part of the issue with this pandemic and communicating throughout it has been pulling the trigger too quick. So if we do a news release right away when an order comes out, for example, and we haven't had the guidelines that accompany those orders, which I'll talk about in a bit, we could be communicating misinformation. And some of it, quite frankly, is bogged up with approval processes as well. So there's things that we can work on streamlining with that, but our communications team, and just to further support them, they're not making the decisions on this, so sometimes they're not getting the responses that they need in a timely fashion in order to get those news releases out, whether it's our fault or because we haven't had the guidelines for it yet.
Any further questions? Thank you very much, Ms. Gurry, and you're up again next for Legislative Services, the two hats.
Yeah. So Legislative Services, it's part of the policy group, or I'm a part of the policy group at the EOC, Emergency Operations Center. And my team has been, some of them have been working from home, some of them are away for other reasons, and I'm pretty short-staffed in person, so all of the work that we do in Legislative Services, whether it be FOI, claims, council meeting support, it's all legislated and still required, so there's nothing that we've been able to put off. So all of that work is continuing, and a lot of it can be done virtually, so those staff members that can do their work from home have been. And some, unfortunately, like Ms. Gerard sitting there, can't do their work from home, and thank goodness for her the last couple of days, or you would not all be sitting here right now. It just wouldn't have come together, so thank you. So that work is still continuing. We're providing support with the legislative requirements to the city and participating in the policy group strategic priorities and the arm of the EOC as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and that's been priority number one. I've outlined what COMS has been doing, and for Legislative Services, regular work is still required to continue, as I just said. So we look after freedom of information requests that have, that work is legislated and therefore must continue. There have been some exceptions and extensions provided for by the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner. So they have allowed some extensions when you ask for them and if they're permitted, and there is some criteria that you have to meet in order to get those extensions. And currently, we are at 84 requests, so that's the first quarter of the year. We're on course for over 330 requests, so that work is still quite heavy and still needs to get done. Some of the requests are quite convoluted, some are very easy, but the ones that are convoluted do take a lot of time and staff hours. So we still have to deal with liability claims and insurance work, liability insurance, so can't tell people to stop filing claims against the city right now, unfortunately. And meeting support for council continues. However, the postponement of committees and task forces has helped with the additional pressures that the pandemic and crisis management has brought onto my team. Records management has to continue. That's called for in the community charter. And there have been a number of orders from the province that affect local government. And I believe you heard Ms. Ligon say that we review those orders and go through them and what it means to each one of us. I think Mr. LaBerge talked about the ministerial order number M082 by law enforcement officer order. So I believe the guidelines just may have come out today for that. I'm not sure if they have yet. And another order, the next order that I want to talk about is order number M083, which is local government meeting and bylaw process COVID-19 order. So this order was issued last week, Thursday, March 26, and it outlines processes for boards and councils to conduct their business during the provincial state of emergency due to COVID-19. It also outlines that local governments can hold their meetings electronically, regardless of whether or not our bylaw allows for it. Ours does, so we were good regardless of this order. It also says that we can have open meetings and not invite the public to attend to the council or board chambers, and that we could have, council could pass 3 readings and the adoption of necessary bylaws in one meeting. And this is only if the need arises due to emergent and time-sensitive financial matters. So guidelines with respect to this order came out earlier this week. I think it was either yesterday or the day before. All days are mashing together right now. And my interpretation of these guidelines is that we should only exercise the allowances provided for if necessary. So the gist of this is we should not limit meeting processes as prescribed in the order by prohibiting public participation, passing bylaws in a single meeting, or conducting regular business under these specially allotted allowances from the public unless absolutely necessary. So we should use these options for matters that are emergent in nature or where we cannot otherwise provide for following the provincial health orders, which is practicing the physical distancing that we are today. So the order also outlines that we must continue to follow existing procedures and processes of meetings, such as having quorum. The majority must still vote in favor to move a motion forward, etc. So in going forward with this, with the order and then the guidelines, Mr. Rudolph and I have had some conversations, and I have some options for council to consider, and also some information just to share with council based on this order. So the regularly scheduled council meetings will remain here at the Shaw Auditorium, and this is because they are scheduled pursuant to our key date calendar, which is a legislated requirement in the community charter that council adopt every year. It also it does allow for meeting changes and cancellations. However, Shaw Cable Programming airs those council meetings for you all at 7 p.m. on those regularly scheduled Mondays, and they will be continuing to do this. So I do suggest going forward that those regularly scheduled council meetings on that calendar remain in the Shaw Auditorium for those reasons and remain at 7 p.m. At those meetings, regular business of council will be continuing, so we still have development permits, etc., going through, like Mr. Lindsay said. And we have not, to date, had delegations sign up for unrelated council matters. And I do suggest using the order and exercising your right as council to not have delegations on unrelated matters come to those council meetings. Instead, if a member of the public or an organization wanted to address council, they could do it via correspondence, and you could deal with it at that meeting. And, because I do believe you could opt to not have that happen under the order. If there is a developer, this speaks to Councillor Brown's question earlier, if there is a developer that would like to come speak to his or her DP application that is on the agenda that evening, I believe council could allow that to continue. They would be told and have to practice the physical distancing in the chamber, but it's large enough for them to, if they do want to come speak and address you, they could do so. This would also allow you to be spread out as you are today, and I think this is working unless you tell me otherwise, and we could try to work it out. For the specially called council meetings like today, going forward, I do suggest, we do have one tentatively planned for Thursday, April 9th. I'm sure you'll be hearing more about that. Those ones, I believe, could be conducted electronically and follow the order of, from the minister. And this is because, for several reasons. Recording of meetings. We have staff at our office that can set up the recording. We can have the Facebook Live Magic Box Tickle Trunk available there for your use. And we could use the technology Zoom that some council members have recently been using and or attempting to use, and could have the training on that. And besides the mayor, I think attending virtually, because of the size of that room, would be the way that I would recommend you going for that. So special meetings that aren't regular council business, that are dealing with specific matters, either passing bylaws or financial meetings, matters that have to be dealt with in an urgent fashion. In those special meetings, the purpose of having a special meeting could be done in electronic format. So obviously at those meetings, we would also hopefully exercise the right in that order to not have the public attend because of the meeting room size. So the live streaming availability of VICC staff, contractors, meetings held with short notice, are also some rationale as to why we would have those special meetings at our facility and not the conference center. So the last order, well, there was another order, Ministerial Order M084, Local Authorities and Essential Goods and Supplies. I believe we did do a news release on that, or there has been some information put out on that. And as it affects us, you'll hear from staff. If it does affect us, we get our information and our guidelines. And M085, Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. This mostly applies to the health sector, as they are legislated by the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act as well, but it allows for limited exceptions under sections 33.1 and 33.2 of the Act, allowing disclosure of personal information, as well as the sharing of personal information when needed, and as long as it's minimal and reasonably necessary to support public health recommendations or requirements. So that's about it.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. As I said, we heard earlier about the shadowing. We know that we're supposed to be going to electric records management. Is that put on hold, or is that something other staff can be doing to help assist, move us forward with that, since we're quite behind the 8 ball on it?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Armstrong. Yes, I wish we had already had that in place right now. It would come in really handy to have had an electronic records system up and running. It's on hold to an extent that resourcing, I think now would be a good time, and I have actually made the suggestion, now would be a good time, an opportunity to get this ball rolling. I think in situations such as these, there is opportunities to have that kind of work pushed forward and throughout the organization, maybe even at a faster pace than would normally be available. So I am looking at ways that that could possibly happen.
And also, can that be done remotely, or does it have to be done at either the SARC or the main building?
So it can be done There's a couple parts to it. For scanning, anywhere there was a scanner, it could be done, so it wouldn't have to be done in City Hall or the Service and Resource Center. So there's different layers to it. Anyone with a computer at the city could probably do a lot of the prep work that we need to get done. So I know when we have already rolled out the pilot project, as we do it corporate-wide, it won't be done from my office, it would be done from all of their offices. So this work being electronic can be done anywhere there's the hardware to do that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Curry, thank you very much. Much appreciated. The next is item 5B, COVID-19 response, vulnerable population. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to start off by saying that I'm going to introduce this next topic, but there are a number of staff here that remain available. Ms. Paul Singh's with us, in addition to other presenters that you've heard from this afternoon. I'm sure some of your questions, as we get through this, they may be able to help and offer their professional opinions on. The idea today is to start the discussion about vulnerable populations. I want to give a little bit of a state of the nation, a little bit of context, and end with some recommendations for council. And I would ask for your understanding, and that normally we would have before you reports with recommendations, but items are moving quickly, and we've had to draft some recommendations for your consideration today, really to help, hopefully help with council having a conversation. Before I get too far into it, though, I want to just talk for a second about the title and what we're talking about today and what we're not talking about, because I think under a pandemic situation, talking about vulnerable populations, I think there's a whole number of groups of people across our community that could be considered vulnerable populations. For example, isolated seniors, absolutely a vulnerable population within our community and deserves our attention and thoughts. Not here today to talk about that. I think what we're really here to talk about is one group, which is those that are homeless or at the risk of being homeless. So focusing today our kind of discussion and our recommendations around that. So as many others have mentioned here today, we're 2 weeks out since the province declared their state of emergency on March the 18th, and since that time the province has set up their emergency operations centers that they're responsible, as this is a health emergency, they're responsible for that. The city set it up, as others have gone into in detail, our own internal emergency operations center, responsible for generally those essential services that we provide on a daily basis to the community. Since the very start of this, Your Worship, in the last couple of weeks, the province has been consistent and clear to us that the responsibility here for vulnerable populations, specifically under the housing and health headings, relies with the province. That's been reiterated over and over to us through our regular calls through EMBC, again up through that emergency framework. And I want to talk a little bit today about some of those, again, some of those orders and some of the direction we're getting from EMBC. I think you've heard a lot today about orders, and times like this we kind of get direction from the province in a number of ways, a couple of which are ministerial orders, and then the guidelines that come out after those orders, which give some more details on how to interpret them, and then separately, directly from EMBC on direction. So I'm going to talk about both of those that have happened relatively recently in just in the last few days on this specific topic. So on March the 26th, which believe it or not was just on Thursday, there was a number of orders, ministerial orders that were issued. You've heard today about order number 82, which had to do with bylaw. Ms. Gurry just spoke to you about order 83, which dealt with meetings. There was order 84, which had in it a number of items. And I guess first of all, it's important to note that the orders aren't just orders to local governments. They can be orders that apply to a number of parties, including private citizens, companies, and other groups. So it's not just orders to local governments, but we will find orders that apply to ourselves within those ministerial orders. So that order 84 on March the 26th, it included statements on a number of issues, including emergency management, supply chain within the province, mutual aid agreements, but it did include a clause regarding vulnerable populations. And I'm going to read it, Your Worship. It said, for the purposes of ensuring the effective management and delivery of critical services for vulnerable populations within the province, including food banks and shelter services, each local authority must use best efforts to provide assistance in management and delivery of such services. Your Worship, that was the wording in the order. There was a subsequent, what some are referring to as advisories, what some are referring to as guidelines, came out on that and provided some further clarity around that clause, stating that for local governments, it would be looking at regulatory and administrative barriers be removed in order to make it easier to support critical services for vulnerable populations like food banks and shelters. The example that's been provided to us in this context would be if there was a requirement to set up a shelter, an emergency shelter, or a food bank in a location to respond to this pandemic, we should make best efforts to deal with any of our regulatory issues, for example, the zoning bylaw. We would look to other tools like temporary use permits or others in order to expedite those types of use. So that's the clarity that we've received to date on that specific ministerial order from last Thursday. That order was quickly followed on Friday, the 27th, with direction from EMBC, again, back up through this emergency framework, further clarification on the topic of vulnerable populations. And it started by saying, this email that came out at 2 o'clock Friday afternoon, started by saying that the province expects local governments will work with and in coordination with regional health authorities and BC Housing on efforts to plan for people facing homelessness. And then there were some specific items in that email that I'm not going to read the entire email, but there's some specific items that were worth noting and saying that some communities may be asked to provide for a list of buildings that could be used to isolate vulnerable populations. It had a request that municipalities look at sanitation and hand washing stations or opportunities for vulnerable populations. And it had a suggestion that bylaw officers may wish to hold off on moving people along who camp in parks outside of the court order and our bylaws, which allow for camping in some of our parks. But it also included statements that the province is looking for other options for self-isolation, including hotels, motels, and campgrounds. Again, that the province would be taking that role. Further that evening, we received another email from EMBC about 8:30 at night saying, you are, Nanaimo, one of the selected communities, and we want your list of facilities by no later than end of day Monday. So that work's been done, and in their email, they cited examples of rec centers, libraries, park facilities that could be available to use to accommodate individuals who needed to be isolated, vulnerable populations that needed to be isolated. So again, we've provided that list up through EMBC. The direction that we're given is that that list would now be distributed to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and that the province will be responsible for tracking these sites, and that they will be responsible for utilizing them as necessary, working with local governments and BC Housing to operationalize these sites once identified. Your Worship, I think all throughout these 2 weeks, I want to reiterate that staff have been in regular and ongoing contact with our counterparts, both at BC Housing and Island Health. Those meetings are continuing. There was discussions and as recently as last evening with our counterparts. Those are ongoing and continuing around these items. The other thing I want to touch on, Your Worship, is around what we're hearing in the community and the comments we're seeing. I know you've received many from service providers. We're seeing generally that there's, because of some of the pressures that are impacting our social service agencies, the same that are impacting ourselves and other businesses, that we're seeing a reduction in service levels across the community. There already was the planned closure of the St. Peter's temporary shelter that was funded by BC Housing, and that was always planned to close at the end of March. So that service is now ended, but there's been other reductions or withdrawals of services, and I'll mention one being the shower program at the New Hope Center. And Your Worship, I only raise that one as an example because that leaves our shower program that the city's providing for the last couple of years as the only current shower program for those experiencing homelessness in our community is in a city-run facility. There's been other consistent concerns raised, we've heard, with regarding staffing at the remaining existing facilities, concerns with sanitation opportunities, again, that idea of hand washing and additional bathrooms for homeless because of the reduction in services around the community, access to clean water, and again, opportunities for people to isolate. So again, those are consistent messages that we've been hearing. Our next update to the Homelessness Coalition is actually meeting tomorrow, and we're planning to make a presentation and update to them at that time on where we are or what we've been directed around this topic. As I mentioned, Your Worship, we continue to provide the shower program, and again, it's the only one that's operating in town. We have a number of washrooms in and around, all throughout the community, but I'll mention some in and around the downtown, including Bowen West Park, Maffeo, Sutton, and Diana Krall, which are currently operating 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. And staff have continued their work, and as mentioned, a considerable amount of work when you have your EOC up is looking at advanced planning. And staff had already done a significant amount of work on scenarios and looking at our facilities and potential requests for those facilities. So when we got that call on Friday asking for a list of our facilities, we were ready to respond quickly, and staff were able to get that in on time on Monday. Your Worship, I do want to end with a few recommendations, and I have just a couple of slides to help with that. And maybe I can just ask that the first one be brought up. And the first slide is very difficult for you to read. The first slide is showing the area of the downtown. The green dots are existing water fountains. The pink triangle, which is on the very top edge of the image, is the existing shower program that we offer. And then I need Mr. Harding's glasses. Sorry, the yellow squares are the washroom facilities in the downtown. This is the current facilities, current state of the nation. And again, I'm bringing this up because of that recommendation that comes to us through the order of looking at additional opportunities to provide sanitation, hand cleaning for homeless individuals in our community. So we've looked at where our existing facilities are, and then the next, if I can forward here to the next slide, is some recommendations that we're making on this topic. So and I'll ask Mr. Harding to jump in here if there's any specifics I missed, but the green are opportunities for access to water that we expect to either have currently operational or operational in the very near future. Keep in mind, many of these are not just because of the season. We normally turn them off in the winter and turn them back on in the summer. So we would normally be turning many of these on. The question I assume I'll get from council is why just the ones in green and why not all the other ones that you normally have throughout the downtown? So our stations are a variety of age and a variety of function. Many are the old, if you can think of the old kind of standard one that we all had at school, which is the bowl and the little tap that everybody takes turns drinking out of, the little fountain. Those ones, we're trying to balance this need to make sure that people have access to water with the fact we're in a current pandemic and health crisis, and we have concerns about opening up those types of facilities right now, especially in and around parks and playgrounds, because of the nature of the pandemic that we're under. Some of these other facilities have slightly different ones, and in fact, the new fountain that just got installed at the Cenotaph or near the Cenotaph actually has the ability to fill water bottles. So I think that would be kind of the more standard approach for water fountains you'd see in the future. There's other access to water on the Portland Loo, for example, on the outside of the washroom facility, which is located in Diana Krall. So those are locations that we're proposing to have operational for water. The bathroom facility at Maffeo Sutton would continue to run from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., but staff are moving forward, effective today, I believe, with the 24-hour opening of the Diana Krall. If council's aware, the facility at the Portland Loo, when it was originally open, was open for 24 hours. We had some significant incidents of vandalism in the building, which required it to be closed for large portions of the day while it was being repaired, and as a result, we went to reduced hours. We are, under this environment, under this situation we find ourselves in, recommending going back to a 24-hour service, and we're going to increase the amount of cleaning that's done at those facilities. So both 24-hour washrooms and water available at the Portland Loo. Your Worship, the large red dots are what we've identified here as temporary washrooms, and what we're proposing is to roll out porta potties with hand cleaning, likely hand sanitizers, which are standard in all of these. We're looking at 3 locations in the downtown right now. We're suggesting the one be in the proximity, none of the final locations have been determined, but we've worked with both our own bylaw officers, our own park staff, and RCMP to identify what we think is the first response, the best and highest needs. So the first one is at the Community Services Building. The center red dot is somewhere in the proximity of Wesley Street, and then the third dot is somewhere close to the Island Highway at the end of Victoria Crescent, possibly near the old fire hall. Again, these are general areas. We need to do some further work once we get council's direction to proceed with this to finalize where those could exactly go with the contractor who will have needs to obviously access them and clean them on a regular basis. I'm sure councils may have a question about the cost. We estimated about $1,000 per unit per month, so we'd have about $3,000 a unit, and that would allow for daily cleaning of these facilities. We are also, though, responsible for if the units are damaged, destroyed through this use, ultimately the contractor requires to be compensated for that. So as I've mentioned to council previously, under this reality we find ourselves in with the emergency framework, we have the opportunity to seek cost recovery up through EMBC when we're responding to issues related to the emergency. So we've had some preliminary discussions with EMBC, just a verbal discussion, who have agreed that we could proceed with this application to them. We couldn't make the formal application yet because we were just finalizing the numbers on the budget. We'll expect that to go in today or tomorrow and get a quick response back. Your Worship, that's generally the locations that we're recommending at this time. And again, I would say this is our first phase in response. As this moves forward, things are changing rapidly, things are changing quickly, and I would not want to suggest for a moment that this is the last step we may take. This is the first step, and we may be back in front of council seeking further support or direction. So on that item, Your Worship, I'll just leave you with, I prepared a couple of we as staff prepared a couple of recommendations that I want to put in front of council, and the first has to do specifically with what I was speaking to on these temporary washrooms, and we're asking council to endorse the plan that I outlined to provide these additional temporary washrooms and hand sanitizing facilities in the downtown. The second, Your Worship, when I talked about those emails and more importantly the ministerial orders that had these recommendations and things for municipalities to think about, and the concerns we're hearing in the community about services and the reduction of services, our recommendation as a council may want to go ahead and exempt the Health and Housing Task Force from your current suspension of committees, and again focus on facilitation of planning for vulnerable populations during this time, and to make further recommendations to council as necessary. And Your Worship, the thought was that's where things like the topic, I think, that I heard earlier from council about this issue of the suggestion about bylaw enforcement, I think that would be a place where those discussions could happen and have input from all the parties that sit on council's task force. Your Worship, that's the end of my presentation. As I mentioned, there's a number of staff here willing to and prepared to take questions on this topic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. Councillor Hemmons.
So thank you. Could you go back to your previous slide? I just want to be sure that I'm clear. So the Diana Krall washroom will now go from open to so many hours to 24/7, all around the clock. The 3 orange dots are where you're proposing additional washroom facilities. And can you walk me through the dots again?
Yeah, so the green dots are locations where we're identifying where water will be available.
Will be, but currently isn't.
The only one that's currently available, of course, the washrooms at Maffeo Sutton are available during the hours the washrooms are open. I think we have might get Mr. Harding to jump in here. I believe there's an external tap there that could be turned on. The other locations, we're recommending that they do be operationalized in very near future. Diana Krall in the Portland Loo the water has been turned on there. Outside the Loo, there's a button system where you can wash your hands. That has been activated just within the last day, I think.
Okay. And as far as reconvening the Health and Housing Task Force, I think it's an essential first step as we navigate these waters going forward. So thank you for bringing those forward, and I would be happy to move them.
So moved, seconded, Councillor Martin. Councillor Thorpe, or does anyone wish to speak to it? Sorry, Councillor Armstrong, who shows up as Rudolph, goes first.
I would like to ask for one other thing, which is to put the needle boxes in there, because we found at Tent City that all the needles were going down and we're paying, I believe, $3,500 per toilet to fix. So I think it's really important, if we're going to do that, that we should probably make the motion as well to add needle boxes, because from previous experience, we know that's what happens. So thank you.
I'm wondering if that's I don't wish to criticize the suggestion. I think the suggestion is a very wise one, but I don't know that we need to add it to the recommendation. I think it's fair to say that, Mr. Lindsay?
Your Worship, it's certainly something that's top of mind, I would say, for staff as we look at the final siting of these, because there are some needle boxes in some of these areas, so there might be an opportunity to site the facilities where there's not. If there's not, and then we did this at Tent City, there was needle boxes that were established at the same time. So that would certainly be our intent.
And just to follow up, and what's the rough cost per box again?
Sorry, Your Worship, I don't have a number off the top of my head of what we've charged or what we've been charged in the past.
I believe we did, wasn't it 3 for $10,000? Wasn't it something like that? Do you know, Dave?
Your Worship, I would have to get back to council. I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
I don't have it in rough time.
I'm going to go to Councillor Martin, then Councillor Hemmons. Oh, sorry, pardon me. I have to think about this. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Mr. Lindsay. I just wanted to start by saying how much I appreciate the efforts that you and your staff have been putting in on this huge file, and I appreciate also today's very clear and concise summary of the situation and the areas of responsibility. I think that's something that's important for council and citizens to understand, and I say that because at the regional district I'm dealing with exactly the same thing, and I have Ministerial Order 84 in my hand, and it's very, very clear who is responsible for what, and our role is to be ready to assist the province in what direction they want to go in. And I see us doing that. I certainly appreciate your recommendations for the short term as far as water and sanitation efforts. I'll be honest, I had some doubts about the need for the second recommendation, with all due respect to the Health and Housing Task Force, simply because in this time of emergency, the reality is we are getting orders imposed upon us, top down, whether we like it or not. And so I wonder about the practical need for the task force, but I'm not opposed to it, so I'm certainly willing to support it. But again, I think you've summed up things very, very well, and I appreciate your efforts, and I will support the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to Councillor Bonner first, and then Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was never allowed up here this often in the last council. My question is to staff and through you, if I may. In this work that you've been doing regarding finding these places, what work have you done in communicating and getting feedback from the Housing Coalition and the various other organizations and agencies in our cities? And one of the reasons I'm asking is we have a lot more homeless people than just in the downtown area. They're actually all over Nanaimo. And what sort of work are we doing for those people who need the same sort of services? Thank you. And I do have some motions coming up later, just a heads up.
Thank you, Worship, and I'll go back to say, of course, our first, this is again, I want to stress, this is our kind of first response, and I agree with Councillor Bonner that we're going to have to continue to monitor this, and if there's further need identified in other parts of the community, because absolutely homelessness is not, this is not 10 years ago Nanaimo or 15 years ago Nanaimo, where it was almost exclusively a downtown issue. It's a citywide issue. The reality is we still see some of the largest populations, though, concentrated in our downtown, and it's historically where many of their services that these people were accessing are found. So as they've withdrawn in these areas, the services in these areas, we think the need is highest in this area, but we may absolutely come back with further requests in other parts of the community, and we will monitor that. Our discussions to date about identifying these locations have been with the RCMP, our bylaw staff, and park staff, all of which work regularly with these populations and were felt to have a good sense of the best general locations. I think there's an opportunity to work with service providers, specifically those that continue to operate in those immediate areas, as we get down to the details of exactly where they are relative to their buildings, and look forward to those conversations.
If I may jump in and say, I have complete confidence in staff's ability to figure out how to do this. We direct staff to fix the problem. How they fix that problem, I think we have to trust to their judgment and common sense, whether it be around the provision of extra amenities or facilities that accompany the provision of water and proper sanitation. And my general view, Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question probably for Ledge Services. How fast can we get the Health and Housing Task Force back up and running? Because there are a lot of issues that aren't captured in just reinstituting the task force that need to be addressed quite quickly.
Thank you, Worship, through you to Councillor Hemmens. All meetings, whether they're task force, council, committees, require 24 hours notice. So I could say 24 hours notice that we could have a virtual phone call. I would say, however, there has been no orders, and the order I did go through earlier doesn't allow for loosening the rules around the way we can perform. So there would still have to be quorum, there would still have to be all of that. So it could be fairly quickly. I would ask council if they could wait till next week so that I could have some more supports in place to put that up, but it could be as soon as, it could be this week even if necessary.
And a follow-up, if I may, to Mr. Lindsay. So we've provided a list of usable facilities to the province. Do we have any sense from the province when we might hear from them?
Your Worship, to Councillor Hemmens, I do not yet. We have not yet received a response. As I mentioned, it's understanding it's going to Municipal Affairs, and my sense is after that would be directed to BC Housing, and I'm sure they're looking at these lists. I know there was at least 2 other communities in the Mid-Island that were also asked for it, and then there was a number of other communities that were told that they were going to be asked for it this week. So I think there's a significant amount of data that they're looking at from all over the province. So it may not be imminent, but
And
we'll
if-
certainly update council as soon as we hear.
Thank you. And if I may, I think that is a really good argument for getting the Health and Housing Task Force up and running as soon as we can, because it's not necessarily the decisions or recommendations will come out of it, but the people who need to have the conversations are part of that group. And if we can set that table and facilitate those conversations, I think we'll move this along in a better way. I also want to point out that Minister Darcy was on the CBC last week as saying that prior to COVID-19 breaking, they were looking at an expansion of their safe supply program that's currently running at St. Paul's Hospital. And I do want to remind council that we submitted a letter to Minister Darcy requesting that we be considered for any test site. So it might be an opportune time to resend that communication and say we're ready and willing to be a test site. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I do appreciate, the needs of the Health and Housing Task Force, but I'm very cognizant of the fact this is provincially led, and we do not want to step outside those boundaries. It's really important, like health and housing do not belong to municipality. We're there to support the province as requested, and I think especially in a pandemic, we do not want to be stepping outside our responsibility. So I'm very concerned about that, because I think some of these people don't understand that, it is a provincial responsibility. It's not a municipal responsibility. And if we start taking them on, we're going to be spending millions of dollars. All one has to do is look at the cost of Tent City, how much that cost us. And we paid for it. So I'm very concerned about that. It's the same as when we hear that, can we leave them in the parks? If we allow them to stay in the parks, we're never going to get them out, because there's not a court that will allow us to let them out because we let them in, unless there's an order that comes from the province. So I think we have to be really, really careful on this, that we know and stay in our lane, as some people like to say. Mr. Sims? Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just meant to mention earlier, and I apologize, maybe Mr. Lindsay did already, but things are changing so quickly on this front from day to day, and I do know that your worship will be involved tomorrow in a conference call with Island Health involved, and also one later in the day with Housing Minister Robinson. So we might well get further direction or clarification tomorrow. That's how quickly things are moving. Thank you.
I live in hope. Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Hemmons.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to reiterate that the Health and Housing Task Force is it's a strategic group of our leaders on this file. And there is, if we can get the group together to have a conversation about what are the priorities, what are our major issues, what is outside of scope, what is within, et cetera, I don't want to stall it because we have this worry that we're going to step on toes. I think we just need to lean in, have the conversation, and deal with the outcomes. Thank you.
Seeing no further. Councillor Turley.
Well, at Monday's meeting, we had asked the question, I thought, that somebody was going to contact the province with regard to what our responsibilities are as ordered, and if we step outside of that, whether the province would still agree to pay for it. Did we ever get that answer?
If we step out our area of responsibility, would the province still pay, or are we on the hook?
Yeah, I think, Your Worship, I think through Councillor Turley, I believe was referring to the framework again under the emergency response, and if there's expenditures that we believe need to be made to comply with ministerial or health orders under this pandemic, there's an opportunity to seek compensation up through EMBC, through the province. So depending on what the specific proposal is, we could then do an expense authorization request, which they would tell us it's valid or not before we made the final expense. So I'm not sure I understood exactly what the expense was being, the Councillor Turley was referring to, but generally that's how.
It was a general question, not specific. So, thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock, then Councillor Hemmons again.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to the two recommendations, I think the drinking water and access to basic hygiene is a critical issue, and it's not something that we can wait for action on. And also, it's clearly that there's a need for coordination between service providers, the city, and BC Housing, Island Health, and so the House and Housing Task Force is a critical element for that coordination to make sure that the funding from the province is there and also in ways that make sense. So I'd just like to move the recommendations. Thank you.
They've already moved and seconded.
Oh, perfect.
And not wishing to gild the lily unnecessarily, Councillor Hemmons, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I have a very quick question before we go there. The toilet facilities that we're looking at putting in, have those been cleared by EMBC?
Your Worship, we've had a verbal discussion with staff there. We've advised them that it was coming forward. We were not able to make the formal authorization because I didn't have the final numbers on the estimate until just before we presented to council. So we will be making that authorization request this afternoon, and we'll get a formal response, I assume, very quickly. If there, for any reason, it's denied, then I would report that back to council.
Okay, thank you.
Could someone reread the motion for Councillor Turley?
I'm sorry, could I? So it's that Council 1, endorse the plan to provide additional temporary washrooms and hand sanitizing facilities in the downtown. And 2, exempt the Health and Housing Task Force from the current suspension of committees in order to assist in the facilitation of planning for vulnerable populations during the pandemic and to make further recommendations to council as necessary.
I think I heard Councillor Turley say thank you. I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor? Contrary? Councillor Turley, you're in favor?
I am.
Then it's unanimous. Thank you very much. Councillor Bonner, you said you have a couple of motions.
Thank you, Your Worship. 4, actually. I'll just read them all out, and if there's any seconders, we can carry on for there if you're fine with that. First one is that the city coordinate with the Nanaimo Homeless Coalition, BC Housing, and Island Health to sanction and resource a coordinated emergency response for individuals experiencing homeless in Nanaimo. That'd be the first one. Do you want to do seconders and then I read the other ones, or how do you want to do this?
I must say, I think we're already doing that. And that's by virtue of provincial order that we are directed to work with BC Housing.
And did you want to just do
you
one
want
at
to
a
do
time?
with them one at a time? Let's do with one at a time. There's been a seconder, Councillor Gesselbrock.
I just was going to speak to it.
Yeah.
First off, I just wanted to thank staff for all the work that's been going on. This is a quickly, rapidly moving situation, and a lot of different levels involved. I think from the conversation with Dale last Monday, this Monday, and to a few of the service providers, I think it's clear that the province, has a large responsibility, and there's not quite a clear roadmap from the province of how to roll out solutions and what will be funded. I think this makes it a challenge for us as a city to figure out what we can do to fill in and what is covered by EMBC provincial plans and funding, and I think this in turn makes it hard to communicate with community service providers. I think it's understandable that the province is slow on being able to effectively identify what solutions on the ground each community context requires and preemptively flag it for funding. This is why it's critical to have ongoing information flow between on-ground community service providers, the city, province, Island Health. And I think that the city is uniquely positioned to provide that coordination. And I think that really it's important that council really provide staff the support to go ahead and take the proactive initiative in helping the province and Island Health help us and take initiative and proactive discussions on that. And so I think that this first motion on coordinating with the Homeless Coalition, BC Housing, Island Health to resource coordinated emergency shelter response is appropriate. And I think it's our role, and I look forward to the other motions as well. Thank you.
I might cheekily suggest that we could ask Ms. Bhopal Singh down here to tell us, no, I'm not asking seriously, tell us how much time she is spending working with all of those agencies, but I'm not going to. Councillor Armstrong?
I think it's already been addressed by the province, and this is a provincial mandate. It is not a city mandate. We are to work with the province, especially in a pandemic. We've already established the Health and Housing Task Force, which has got all those key players at the table. Our staff is already working with all those people, and then to give them more work on top of it, which is just repeating stuff, to me is not right, and I don't think it's needed, because, again, we have to take our direction from the province. We can't be going out willy-nilly, and they've been very, very clear in all of their conversations to the mayors and to councils. We are the leaders in this. So I think we have to be really careful, because it's not our role. Our role is to support. Thank you.
We are staffing the Health and Housing Task Force, aren't we? Any further discussion then, if Councillor Bonner? Because I'm going to ask you to reread it before we actually vote on it.
Sure, and I have this written, typed down, so we can get to it. The reason I'm bringing this forward is it's out of a necessity that I don't think that the province and the city alone is going to solve this problem, especially in the immediate. Yes, they are the leaders. But the idea here is that we need a coordinated approach to this, and we need input from the agencies that are actually doing the work on the ground. And that's why the idea behind this. The Housing and Housing Task Force will be part of this, and it'll probably be one of the instigators. But I think it's really important that we put this down as a motion so that we basically say everybody needs to work together and come up with a plan together, which will include payments and resources from the province. I don't expect that wouldn't come out of there anywhere. Because let's remember who's on the Health and Housing Task Force. It's the city, it's the Housing Coalition, it's also the BC Housing, as well as the Island Health. So we have some very high hitters on this organization. So I think this particular motion as it stands just says we need to have a coordinated approach, a strategy, so that we can actually have something to work with and present to the province.
Could you reread the motion again, please?
Sure. That the city coordinate with the Nanaimo Homeless Coalition, BC Housing, and Island Health to sanction and resource a coordinated emergency response for individuals that experience homelessness in Nanaimo.
The word I'm having trouble with is resource. Councillor Hemmons, that means money.
Support of this motion, although if we get the Health and Housing Task Force up and running and functioning quickly, I think it could be redundant. But why I support this motion is because I see this as a very essential first piece of work for the task force to begin kind of working with. And again, to Councillor Armstrong's point, it's whose job this is. We all know that certain pieces are coordinated and resourced by certain bodies, etc. What I'm asking for is a conversation with our leaders in this industry locally to identify where the gaps are. The province is running it, but we know there's gaps. We just addressed one today with hand washing stations and washrooms. So what are some other things that we could be kind of peeking around the corner at decisions that are coming our way from the province? And I think this is a good piece of first work for the task force to begin with. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Aside from the fact that, as everybody at this table knows, I don't like motions on the fly, I appreciate the intent of this, but I just can't see that it's necessary. I see it as being redundant, and I think we are in a position where we need to take the lead of the province on this and react to what they tell us to do, not to spend our staff's time coordinating local agencies to come up with possibly recommendations that we will not be able to follow, because that will not be within our purview. So I won't be able to support it.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be supporting this motion in particular because the province, on March 27th, through the EMBC Pre-Arc Director, issued the statement that they expect municipal governments will work in coordination with the regional health authorities and BC Housing. I fully trust staff for doing that. However, we did hear from, and when I speak with people in this particular community, the agency provider, the general consensus is there's a lack of coordination and a lack of sort of central leadership. So I will be supporting it. I'm not too concerned about the language around resourcing. I read that as that this table will discuss where potential resources may come from. And if there is an ask that comes to a city, I would expect that it would ultimately arrive at the council table. So thank you very much for bringing this forward, Councillor Bonner. I will be in support.
I was just about to offer my comments on it, if I may. As much as I appreciate the support of Councillor Hemmons and Bonner, who sit on the Health and Housing Task Force, as Yogi Berra said, it's deja vu all over again. I thought that's what we set up the Health and Housing Task Force for many months ago, to do exactly this, to try and bring together the appropriate parties. I am secondarily very troubled by the concept of the term resource. Sorry, but that's too broad a term for me. I will not support the motion. I expect the Health and Housing Task Force to do its work. I'm confident they can. I'm also a little more confident now that the province is finally starting to come to grips in the midst of another crisis, this crisis that has been in our streets for a very long time. And it's getting a bit tiresome, frankly, from my perspective, that City Council has to lead the charge on an issue that is clearly a province-wide issue, that is a national issue. So having said that, I won't be supporting the motion, but anyone who wishes to follow me, please now, otherwise we'll have the vote. Councillor Hemmons, did you want to?
Yes, I do. Thank you. The province is playing a really crucial role in kind of telling us what they're working on and what we can expect. And I think it's our responsibility as a city not to press pause and just to continue to do our work, continue to connect with our leaders, continue to think about these problems that I promise you will not be solved by the province. The province coming through is not going to solve our homeless situation. There are specific issues in this population that require, I think, a very different lens and some immediate action like we've seen today with the water and the washrooms. I was sitting here thinking, you know, what's an analogy I can use? And so my kids are out of school right now, and the Ministry of Education said, hang on, we're going to get you a plan, but we don't know what it is yet. My kids are still not watching TV for 8 hours a day. I'm still trying to keep them in a rhythm. I'm still trying to talk to them about learning opportunities, et cetera. So I kind of see what the city is doing as that. We're paving the way for when those decisions come, we're ready to grab them. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
I would like to hear from Mr. Lindsay to see the impact on, how is it going to impact their staff? Like, we're at minimal staff. They're already doing all of this. Where are we going to find the time for them to do it? What about the other 99,500 people in this community? Are we now going to set up task force to help those in isolation? Are we going to set up funding for those in isolation? Are we going to do all of this? We have to remember, we're a city of 100,000 people, not just 500 people. And to keep taking our staff time in a time of a pandemic and a crisis and keep applying all of it to homelessness, to me is not right. There's another 99,500 people. Thank you.
Mr. Lindsay, and then Councillor Gesselbrock.
Your Worship, at the risk of sounding like Switzerland, the proposed motion is not contrary to, I think, the motion that Council's made. I think the intent when we were drafting it was to reflect many of the things that I hear in the proposed motion around the Health and Housing Task Force, and recognizing that it has those partners which staff are in regular communication with at Island Health and BC Housing, but also has representatives from the Health and Housing Coalition sitting at the table, so that some of those discussions, I didn't get down to articulating it, I think, in the same way, but that was certainly the thought and the intent behind getting the task force going again, from my perspective.
Councillor Gesselbrock, who I'm going to trust will be the last speaker.
Thank you, Worship. I just felt the need to push back a little bit against Councillor Armstrong's comments. I think that our homeless population is extremely vulnerable. Individuals right now are having trouble accessing drinking water. They're having access to washrooms where they're having to defecate in the streets. There's nowhere to wash their hands. There's closure of shelters. We've got a public health emergency where we're asking individuals to self-isolate, to stay at home, and we have a group of people who do not have the ability to do that. So this population is at high risk of transmission of COVID-19, which puts at a greater risk the rest of our larger community. And so I think that if we are not proactive and help the province in what they're actually asking us to do, Mr. Lindsay is right. We need to just help the province help us and be ready to take these opportunities. I think that we are actually putting our community at greater risk. Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor of the motion? Contrary? Councillor Turley, what say you?
Opposed?
Opposed? The motion carries. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. The second one is that the city coordinate a meeting with BC Housing and relevant social service providers to develop a food security action plan, including funding, procurement, and distribution options to provide safe and consistent meals for individuals experiencing homeless and vulnerable populations.
We have a seconder in Councillor Brown. Do you wish to speak to it first, and then we'll get on to the list?
Yeah, the idea behind this motion is that as things are closed down in our society and especially restaurants and various other places, we have two problems. One is that people who are homeless and have been homeless, or vulnerable populations as well, are having trouble finding things to eat. And we also have in the possibility of this, we also have a fairly large restaurant industry that is not doing very much work right now. And so there's a possibility that through this, one of the ideas would be to hire restaurants to produce food that can be used to help feed homeless and or vulnerable populations. So this is kind of a twofold thing, and it's economic, and it's also in the question of helping homelessness and our vulnerable populations. Thank you.
Mr. Lindsay.
BC Housing is doing that.
Your Worship, I'm not trying to influence the debate, just for a point of information that I probably should have made earlier. This topic, and as services have withdrawn, has certainly been an issue about access to food. I can confirm that we've had discussions with BC Housing going back over a week now on this topic. They are aware of it. Their mention to us was that they are currently working with service providers in the community, looking at opportunities for mobile distribution of food. So that is on the radar, and it's something that they are looking at. Again, not trying to influence, I just want to make sure Council is aware of that.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not going to say for or against at this point, but I think Mr. Lindsay just highlighted a really interesting point. and that's that these conversations are happening, but we're not aware of them. So I'm hearing from service providers that they're transitioning their staff or frontline clinical workers to food service production, making sandwiches. So for me, this is again top priority, and I'm grateful to hear that BC Housing is on top of it. And if the Health and Housing Task Force, if supporting this motion is going to light some fire under that, or whether that's already, the fire's been lit, I don't know. But I think, again, this is pointing out we don't have information that we need in order to make our decisions. So I'm just highlighting that. And perhaps that's about the Health and Housing Task Force not meeting and not having to vet this information and kind of distribute it to the community. But I'm just noting a discomfort that conversations are taking place, and that's amazing, but I'm not aware of those conversations taking place, and that's a problem. Thank you.
If a leaf falls in the forest, does anyone hear it? Only if they're there to hear it fall. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I don't mind if these motions are redundant. The purpose here is to really support staff and just helping with that coordination and that information transfer, and making sure that council is comforted and aware of the fact that this is being addressed and dealt with in the community, because access to food is critical for this group of people. Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Through my connections with Rotary and other organizations, the Loaves and Fishes is still functioning. In fact, they are still looking for volunteers to help sort food at their warehouse. And also the Salvation Army, the New Hope Center, they now have a mobile food unit out front. Our Rotary Club normally does a breakfast a month there. We've decided, because of the risk to our members, to hold it off, but that then meant that the Salvation Army took over that particular food service. And then I see from emails being getting that the 710 Club is trying to encourage people to volunteer and help out as well. So to say there's no food services available is a bit of a misleading statement, in my opinion. I certainly, that in addition to the fact that if BC Housing is looking into some of these, that in my opinion is viable. My concern about this type of a motion is it's going to put us at financial risk down the road over something that really is not part of the city's mandate. So I'm afraid I can't support it.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. And I've also heard from the province that there will be, they're looking at mobile distribution of food, but for those, and this is mostly for the public, the food bank is not actually operating in all its locations. It is operating on Farquhar Street from Monday to Friday, and I think one of the churches on Saturday. The food bank, this last Friday anyways, was surprised at the limited number of people that had gone down. It was a person in the community I know who uses the food bank, and he was very thankful because he got extra supply because they didn't realize that not so many people would be showing up. But I think we do have to be concerned about the food distribution throughout our city, because we're not just talking about the homeless population, we are talking about vulnerable seniors. And I know that for a fact that seniors use the food bank quite a bit, and I think we need to look at our food distribution amongst our city. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Your Worship, just for staff's sake, if Councillor Bonner could read that second motion again slowly.
I was going to ask him to do that for my own benefit too.
That the city coordinate a meeting with BC Housing and relevant social service providers to develop a food security action plan, including funding, procurement, and distribution options to provide safe and consistent meals for individuals experiencing homelessness and vulnerable populations.
I take your motion not to suggest for a moment that the city is funding. Is that correct, Councillor Bonner?
Absolutely not, Your Worship, is we're looking for options for funding. And I would remind council that recently, as just a couple of days ago, the United Way through the Nanaimo Homeless Coalition received $400,000 from the federal government to help with homelessness. And they will be making decisions in the next little while on how that is to be spent. There is lots of money out there available for these type of programs. But at the same time, I am willing as a councillor to put some money where our mouth are if needed. But I really want to see the plan come back so that we can know exactly what the options are.
Councillor Armstrong.
Again, if we could hear from Mr. Lindsay, because I believe all of this is being done.
Not to put you on the spot, Mr. Lindsay, but
I think, Your Worship, I'll answer that in the form of a question, I think, because we would require some clarity around the motion of exactly how would we be deemed to satisfy this. I think part of the intent was both through our attendance and participation at the Homelessness, Housing and Homelessness Committee, where BC Housing is present, that some of these conversations could take place. It's also the thought that with the reconvening, for lack of a better word, of the Health and Housing Task Force, that also partners that were there could have those similar discussions. So I'm just nervous about, I just want to have some clarity on how exactly staff would achieve that. If it's more about the coordinating of meetings, because I think those meetings are happening, it's more about, I guess, the outcome, I guess, that I just would want clarity on it.
Just to follow up with Mr. Lindsay again, it's like, where are we getting all the staff to do this? Like, we have one person dedicated, Ms. Ball Singh, who is, I imagine, probably extremely swamped. Where's she going to find the time to have all these coordinated meetings? If they're, I thought that was the whole purpose of the Health and Housing Task Force, was to deal with these issues there, because all the players are at the table, and then come back with recommendations to council. So we're having a different meeting, and then a different meeting, and then a different meeting, which may be the opposite of what one says, and then the opposite of another. Like, for me, the whole purpose of that task force was to deal with these issues, not to keep having these motions where now we have to pull staff and keep pulling staff. And where do we keep pulling staff from? Like, they're getting exhausted. Thank you.
Councillor Mark Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. My understanding from Dale's response is that staff are already having these conversations, and as we re-implement the Health and Housing Task Force, I actually see this motion as well as the previous motion going directly to the task force, and it just sets council's kind of agenda of like, okay, guys, this is what we want you to talk about. We do have a coordinated emergency response plan that has been submitted by members of the coalition. I think it's appropriate that the task force take that as their first piece of work. So I don't see these, you know, there could be an argument made that these motions are redundant, but what I actually see is that we've set the table of bringing everyone back together, and these are further directions upon that.
Your Worship, one suggestion could possibly be that these motions be sent to the Health and Housing Task Force to work on, or invite the appropriate parties to that, and then make recommendations to council. Like, if the original motion passed.
I'd be much more pleased with that prospect, because I hate voting against the motherhood, what appears to be motherhood, but I'm not prepared to support redundancy either. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I would support having these referred to the Health and Housing Task Force. If that's being reestablished, that's where this should be discussed. I must repeat my discomfort with dealing with motions that staff are just hearing, presumably for the first time, that have not had a chance to give them due thought and consideration and give us the benefit of their measured response and advice. So I would be fine with these going to the task force for discussion, recommendations coming forward to council from there. That's how I think it should be structured. But as you just said, Your Worship, unfortunately, I'm in a position right now where I will not be able to support, again, what seems like a well-intentioned motion. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I understand the motion correctly, I absolutely will be supporting it. I think the coalition, the task forces, again, this is suffering from a problem of coordination, and these help frame potential approaches. While we might struggle with indecision and who's doing what and all that sort of thing, I am very assured that the particular virus that we're facing does not suffer from indecision. So the more that we act on making sure that this particular vulnerable population that is at risk themselves, but also will carry the continuation of this virus through our population and put more of our residents at risk, I think it's absolutely crucial that we get everybody talking, reduce confusion, figure out the logistics, and make sure that these folks are isolating correctly and having the resources provided to them so they can properly isolate to the best of all our capacities, including the province, the City of Nanaimo, and our social service agency providers who are strapped, and we have heard from that need some help with local coordination.
So if no one's going to make a motion to refer it to Health and Housing Task Force, Councillor Bonner?
I don't have a problem with referring it to the task force. What I do have a problem with is that it needs to have some weight behind it. And so if it were the case that we were to refer it to the task force, which honestly I think they would be doing this anyway, that this be asked specifically for this to come from them. So that's what I'm working for now. And I don't like doing motions really on the fly as I'm standing here. So I'd be looking towards.
Did I hear you make a motion to refer this to the Health and Housing Task Force?
Not yet.
Not yet.
My concern is that it goes there and it has some weight behind it. So if that is the will of council, that they would like to see this done, then I'd be fine with referring it to the task force.
Well, I don't know what weight the mayor brings to it, but I'll certainly support a motion to refer. Is there a seconder?
Seconded.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion on the motion to refer to the Health and Housing Task Force? Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Your Worship. When I was up here the first time, I saw Councillor Bonner's written, and I think a referral is actually an incorrect approach in terms of just it adds length of time. If this is something that we believe in, that the task force should be doing, then I believe that we should amend the original motion that I'm trying to find it here.
I'm sorry, do you have a copy of the motion? Does people have copies of this motion?
Councillor Bonner left his sheet here. That I would say that the motion really should be modified, that the Health and Housing Task Force develop a food security action plan, et cetera, et cetera. I know I'm aware that there's a deferral motion on the floor. I will not be supporting it, and if it is defeated, I would propose an amended motion that the Health and Housing Task Force do this particular work.
If I've ever heard evidence to support Councillor Thorpe's contention as chair of the RDN that this is why we don't do these on the fly, this discussion is it. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I actually, I think Councillor Brown is correct that what council could do is give this work to the Health and Housing Task Force. So not defer it to them, but request that the Health and Housing Task Force do A, B, and C, what Councillor Bonner's motion is that I still don't have. So I'll have to get that from him afterwards so I know exactly what is I'm speaking of. So if the deferral motion could be withdrawn and then council could amend the motion to request the Health and Housing Task Force, if that is council's will.
And it might be helpful if we hear the other motions as well. Perhaps Councillor Bonner, you could read your other two motions so that.
First, Your Worship, there is a motion on the floor, so we do have to deal with this one first.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
just a point of information for the council, I want to hear what those other motions are. It might assist us in reducing the amount of time we're spending talking about this.
They're actually sort of not quite related, but I'll read them out for you. That the city send updates 2 times each week to the Nanaimo Homeless Coalition regarding the latest development around solutions, and ask Island Health and BC Housing to participate in those updates via the city. And the last one is that correspondence be sent to, thank you, regarding Councillor Hammond's comments there, to be sent to Minister Darcy reiterating the City of Nanaimo's willingness to be a test site for innovative approaches to addressing mental health and addiction challenges.
Okay, so they're sort of unrelated. Thank you. Good. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to propose amendment to Councillor Bonner's motion that is on the floor, and it would be that the Health and Housing Task Force develop a food security plan including funding, procurement, and distribution options to provide safe and consistent meals for individuals experiencing homelessness and vulnerable populations.
Your Worship, I would just amend it slightly to say that council direct the Health and Housing Task Force to.
Agreed. We have a seconder. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. I appreciate this approach of tasking the Health and Housing Task Force to come up with these strategies. I think that the work to date, getting the ball rolling on access to washrooms and proper hygiene is important, but I think an additional task to make sure that the entire Health and Housing Task Force has a discussion. I would like to add that they develop, just let me find it here. Develop a water and washing plan, including funding and implementation to provide safe resource locations for those experiencing homelessness. Thank you.
Do I hear a seconder for that amendment to the motion in light of the previous motions we just passed a little while ago around the provision of washrooms, etc.? I don't hear a seconder, Councillor Gesselbrock. Councillor Hemmens, I haven't been ignoring you. I've just forgotten about you.
I've completely forgotten.
Oh, perfect. It worked. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would be willing to support the referral to the Health and Housing Task Force, except I'm now understanding that rather than just refer this for discussion as a possible action or priority, it's to refer it with the direction that the Health and Housing Task Force commit to doing this, which really means committing our staff to doing this, which means assuming it's a priority over other possible recommendations. So if that's the new wording that I'm hearing, then I will not support this.
Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can I just have Mr. Lindsay explain, if this was to successfully land with the Health and Housing Task Force, given that these conversations are already taking place, we do have a plan for an emergency response from the Homeless Coalition that was really 3 pages, didn't take a ton of effort, just like these are the major issues we need to look out for. Is it reasonable to think we could have a comparable plan around food security come from the task force rather quickly? And I don't mean you're doing this, this is the current circumstances, these are the holes we need to fill.
Thank you, Your Worship, Councillor Hemmens. I appreciate the question, and somewhat, because things are moving so quickly, and I appreciate the comment about council not knowing all of these things. I guess my question, I'm sorry, I'm answering questions with questions, but I guess if by the time we had our first health and housing meeting, BC Housing had announced their plan and indicated how they were doing it and if they were prepared to fund it and they were rolling it out, would the Health and Housing Task Force endorsing that plan satisfy council's motion? Because I think it could be as simple as that, possibly.
Councillor.
I can't speak for the Health and Housing Task Force. I can speak as the co-chair. If it ticks all the boxes that we need ticked, yes. I also want to circle back to my saying that we didn't have this information is not a critique of staff. It's simply an artifact of things moving so quickly and us with these motions trying to ground it in coordinated activities.
Sorry, Your Worship, it wasn't taken as a comment. I just reflecting that things are moving extremely fast on all these fronts, and appreciate that.
So what is the motion now, Ms. Gurry? Can you give us even...
Not really, but what I can tell you is the original motion has been amended now to direct, that council direct the Health and Housing Task Force to do this work on behalf of council. They would have to then bring that recommendation back to council.
Councillor Armstrong.
Or any recommendations, sorry, that did come out of this, or if the work was just done, it would be done.
So it goes to Health and Housing and comes back to council.
If there are recommendations of money, funds, et cetera, all of those would be recommendations the Health and Housing Task Force would make to council. So they can't, that they're not empowered to spend funds, or et cetera, but you are directing them to do this work, do this coordination work, work on this project for council. It's not unlike when a committee or a task force has a work plan, it's brought up to council to endorse. Council can give committees and task forces work to do, so you're giving them work to do. And by amending the motion, I think Councillor Brown's intent behind that was that council is backing the Health and Housing Task Force doing this work.
Councillor Hemmons again?
I think I say this with trepidation. I feel like I can speak for the task force and that we want this work. We would like to be developing a food plan, just like we ticked off some boxes with the water and washrooms today. We would like to be coordinating an emergency response and recognizing that staff are already involved in those conversations, but bringing the group back together and tasking them provides that kind of leadership and coordination so no one feels like they're outside of the room or outside of the decision-making.
Anything further? Let me just comment that we do have a council meeting on Monday, and I appreciate Councillor Bonner's passion around these issues as always, but my general sense is we have spent a great deal of time today gilding the lily and telling or suggesting or directing, asking staff and or the Health and Housing Task Force to do what is its mandate and work in any event and could do without direction or advice. But feeling somewhat ground down, I will support this motion as it apparently reads now, if for no other reason than to get it off the table and get it over to them. But I think I'm going to say this as firmly as I can. There is good reason why Mr. Cuff told us over and over again, and if we support Mr. Cuff, we have to support everything. We don't get to pick and choose. This is not cherry picking. First heard, deferred. This is not the way to make good public policy. And frankly, I don't know that it results in directions to staff that are particularly useful, because at the end of the day, the talkers do the talking, but the staff does the walking. And I don't know that we are really assisting them in doing anything other than what they're already doing. Question, is there anyone who wants, my question is anyone else who wants to say anything on this particular motion before I call for the vote? Hearing none, all those in favor? Councillor Turley?
Opposed?
Opposed? Those opposed? Councillors Turley, Thorpe, and Armstrong. Thank you.
Your Worship, out of respect for the council's time and staff's, I could quite easily bring these up at our Monday meeting. I do not remember having the discussion with Mr. Cuff about pandemics, but I'm sure he's probably got something up there now on his website. So I would quite willing to bring these back to you on Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
I just question, will this be an agenda item on Monday? Because if not, then there would technically have to be no motions anyway. I don't know what the motions are.
Ms. Gurry, good point.
Your Worship, if council right now defers those two motions to Monday's meeting, then they could be dealt with at Monday's meeting. And we could have them, and I need them anyways from Councillor Bonner now for the minutes today, and then we can have them on the agenda for Monday.
Is there a motion to refer them to council meeting Monday? Councillor Bonner, you so moving?
I so move.
Seconded. Councillor Armstrong? All those in favor? Councillor Turley, how vote you?
Yeah, that's fine. I would prefer to see them as a notice of motion, but that's okay.
Any opposed? Motion, Councillor Gesselbrock is opposing.
Is this to refer it to Monday?
Yes, to get it to Monday.
Yeah, I'm opposed. I prefer to have notice of motion now at least.
Okay. Well, I hate to tell you, but you lose. Thank you very much. We, in theory, have question period. Don't think that's going to happen. And I'm not going to wish to adjourn because we're going back to the in-camera meeting. Ms. Gurry?
No, Your Worship, so you're going to recess the open meeting, and then you'll,
Thank you.
you'll have a procedure
Yes.
or motion to go back into closed. So we need to make sure everything is turned off first, so you might want to have a 5-minute recess, or 10.
All right,
We're
a
hungry, 5.
5-minute recess, please.
Sorry, Cheryl.